chat over. I don't have a co-chair to help me out with this like I did last year. So, all right. Welcome everyone to the 2025 virtual workshop, the Arkansas Legislative Day and Drive-In Workshop. Let me start my presentation here. Um, yeah, so this year what we've done is we've combined the Arkansas Legislative Day and the Drive-In Workshop into one. I am your host, Steve Colley. I am the SACEX Arkansas Government Relations Chair. And I'll introduce myself later when I give my presentation to give Betsy some time since I know she's got to travel soon. Um, so today we're going to have one second. Okay. I got a question there. So we have several presenters today, the fantastic presenters. Betsy's going to give a presentation on demystifying the legislative advocacy from her own experience. She comes from Franklin Road Academy in Nashville, correct? Um, and then I will give a presentation on developing a narrative for holistic admissions. And then we have Eric Brown from the Clinton School of Public Service. He's going to discuss his research on overcoming barriers for Hispanic students in Central Arkansas. And then our famous Darren Morgan here in Arkansas, he's going to give a presentation on unlocking access, and we are looking forward to that. In the interest of time, since we kind of had a little bit of a rough start here, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Betsy. Betsy, if you want to share your screen, if it doesn't work, I can share yours as well. Oh, you're on mute.
All right. Okay. I think I've got us on here. Can you confirm you can see those slides well?
Yes,
and you
I
can
can
see
see
all
those
the things you
slides.
need to see. Good. So I see a couple of names that I recognize who are here. And I just want to clarify from the chat, there was a question about muting and unmuting. Since this is a webinar format, you will never need to worry about muting or unmuting yourself. So I know if you're plugging in today and you're listening in for a time or two, that is a-okay. So just keep that in mind. And you can mute your computer if you don't want to hear us or tune us out for a bit. But I was really excited to be pulled into this because I have certainly never done any sort of advocacy work in Arkansas, but am happy to kind of plug in and share my story. So I have been, and as we kind of talk through this, small numbers can make a big impact, and so can large numbers, and we see that all the time. And so really what I think that I was asked to kind of contribute today is how my voice hopefully plays a role, and how your voice plays a role in advocacy and implementing policy change or working towards policy change or promoting certain policies that are already enacted. And so I got really involved with Kentucky ACAC when I first started in college admissions, and really, really loved that. Had an incredible mentor there who was really involved in government relations at the national level and in DC. And so she kind of took me under her wing because that was an area of interest and passion for me. And then I tried to continue to cultivate and recruit people for whom it may not be their biggest passion, but started to see why their voice matters and why actually students cannot go to the Capitol very often to amplify their voices surrounding education. They don't know or understand that impact yet. And so what you're going to hear me say a lot over the next like 15 minutes or so, maybe, is the opportunity for amplification. And so for those of us who can get out of our schools or have time to pick up a phone or have time to call, really what legislative advocacy is amplifying or highlighting or moving into the spotlight a potential piece of legislation, or just being a little voice in a tiny ear of someone who can enact change, both in school districts, both at the legislative level, pick your person. But really that is what we were trying to do. And so what I want to talk through for just a few minutes is my story and my experience, and then also just kind of give some strategies for impact in big and small ways, and then turn it over to you all as you kind of embark upon how you can look at the education landscape in Arkansas as moving ahead, and then ways that you can kind of chunk out small, tiny action steps to move forward. So for me, the importance of education advocacy has been around for a long time. My mom was a public school first grade teacher for 31 years. Many, many people in my family have been impacted by the power of higher education. And again, I really want to just empower you to know that like counselors and student advocates, be it if you are in a classroom, if you're a teacher, if you're a counselor, if you work on behalf of students, you are the ones who know the stories of the students, right? So you are working to ensure that they have resources, that they have support they need to excel academically. And our legislators and people making decisions in school districts, school boards need to hear those voices too. And in a lot of different ways, we will talk through why building relationships with people that we love and people that we may disagree with, who are not doing the work we think they should be doing, or those who really are, both need to hear from us, right? Like you need to hear from your cheerleaders, and you need to hear with people for whom you might think need to make a different decision. And so that's what, without being overly politically charged, even though I know many, many of us are in this day and age, I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So here's a couple of pictures. If you don't want just text on slides, again, I have been doing this now for about 15 years since I started as a college counselor. And now, even though I still work at an independent school, I often find that I am able to get out of school. Like I have a lot of supportive administrators, and I can go and speak on behalf of my school counseling colleagues and a lot of my CBO colleagues and a lot of my charter school colleagues. There are many, many different things, many different voices in advocacy for education. And a lot of times people want different things. But really what your role is, if you are not advocating on behalf of a certain group, and we'll talk that in a minute, is you are talking as a citizen, right? So when you are going to meet, the reason we have Arkansas days, Tennessee days, Kentucky days, and then also federal, national days, is because you are the voters. You are the people, the power to vote people in, to vote people out. And you are also the voice of reason when it comes to education. And we will get at that a little bit. I know that education is personal. So I mentioned a minute ago, like sort of this bipartisan type of approach. And yet I know that increasingly people feel a lot of different ways about that. And I want to leave space for that, because usually people coming to the table wanting to speak up care a lot, right? You are not here by accident. You probably didn't click on this webinar because you don't care much about politics and what's happening in Arkansas in education and with this drive-in workshop. You do care. And so that's why you're here. And I do think the personal is actually what resonates most. So with better support in education, students will become more informed, better engaged citizens. And regardless of how you feel about higher education, regardless of how you feel the person you might meet with in power feels about it, they want an educated, informed, engaged citizenship. They want people in the workforce in their communities. They don't want people to leave. And so however you can crack that nut, get that message to the person who needs to hear it, is really what is most important in using your voice. The outcomes that you've seen with students, the ways that you have seen lives changed and impacted for the good of the whole for your state is kind of the focus here. So these are kind of my 4 keys to make an impact. So if you are thinking about trying to get involved, trying to meet or call or arrange meetings with your senators, with your representatives, with federal legislators, the things that are most important in those meetings is knowing who you're talking to. And so that's what I want to leave a little time for this morning before Steve takes things back over and kind of starts advancing some of the Arkansas pieces, is to think about how can a story resonate, right? Like you work with students every day. We use metaphors, we use all kinds of things to try to resonate with different kids, right? So the way that I like to think about these storytelling tactics is differentiation of a really important thread and a really important story of education and what we are doing. So in order to do your research, pick a story about yourself and your students that you feel like the person that you might be meeting with, the person that you are picking up the phone to call, if that is an elected person or if that is an aide that they have hired. What research can you do on the front end that will tell you, do they have children? How old are those children? What is their background in education? How do they feel about all of these things? Will help equip you with kind of the tools and the stories that you need from your personal experience, because you are not expected to know the ins and outs of every bill. That is not your job. You are not expected to know all of the ways in which this could work or fit into an overall budget. Yes, that can potentially be helpful in recognizing, but really the biggest pieces of this are to say, I'm here to tell my story because I think this legislation matters and I think this is why. And so being able to provide that evidentiary support and tell your stories as the actual educators is really, really valuable. The other thing that can be really helpful, depending on when you are meeting with folks or calling people, is if it is applying a direct action. So if you are calling, the storytelling is powerful, but also being able to name and make a request. Please vote yes, no on House bill, on Senate bill. So there's obviously a lot of call campaigns happening right now. You can even probably see them in your feed, in your TikTok, in your Instagram, friends with opinions like call so-and-so and here's a script. And those scripts can be important because they have people answering the phones and documenting action steps, but also if you can differentiate it, if you can tell a story, if you can go a step further and meet with someone, that's important too. The things that I have found to be most helpful in my time of doing Kentucky and Tennessee and national advocacy days have been in my offers to collaborate with them. I need you to vote no on this bill, or this budget is garbage. Why can we not have more here? Or how can we not, like have this conversation, has really been in my offer to collaborate. I have had some representatives ask me to come and like testify on different things, to be a voice as an educator in some committee meetings. And so as they were thinking about things, that is something that I would really offer up and can extend the conversation beyond a one-day quick hit legislative day or an advocacy day or a day on the Hill. If you can say, can I give you my contact number in case you need an opinion on how how these decisions would made, or how this impact the decision that you are voting for when you go to vote on this bill, this is how this is going to play out. And can I be a voice in that room when you all are having that conversation? And sometimes they'll take you up on it, and that can be really cool. And then the other way that I have found a lot of success is to partner with other groups, right? We are not doing this alone. And so there are a lot of school counseling groups. We are I'm getting ready to show like kind of the NACAC, SACAC type vibe, but we can partner with other groups that are community-based organizations also having Hill days. Public school counselors, Day on the Hills, kind of looking around your groups, asking around who would be interested is a great way to merge that. As you are thinking about where to find these things, you may already know this because you found this webinar, but NACAC does put forth a lot of the things that they support, right? So they're always combing. You do not have to do all of the dirty work and the research and combing through things. They are proactively doing work. They have people hired looking at any type of bill or any type of legislative policy that would advocate college affordability, student protections against abuse and fraud, DACA and the DREAM Act, student mobility, right? So how do we continue to allow students to move in and out of the United States to access higher education? And then increasingly, and I think you all will continue to talk more today about transfer pathways and direct admission approaches and some things that really will kind of continue to mitigate some of the barriers to entry to college, right? And that's what we all want to continue to see for a lot of our students. NACAC, if you have not signed up for this, the monthly advocacy checklist, I try to frequent this every month. They also will push out emails once you're on that listserv, and I just take action and it makes me feel good, right? Like, so even if I'm not using my voice in big ways or going to the Capitol every week when I'm not working in lobbying directly, I know the things that are important to me and I read through them and I feel savvy for having read this and I feel more and more informed. And then I think that that can be a really helpful thing to, again, feel like I may not be able to do everything, but I can do something and I can take part of this. So of course, lots of groups have these. Decide which ones are the most important for you. For example, this morning, NACAC sent an email. and they had a whole lot of bullet points. Inside Higher Ed is continuing to push a lot of information, but NACAC really is the voice that's pushing this access piece, right? Again, there are lots of different agenda items, but the one thing that I have been most a part of is NACAC, SACAC, and the pushing of access to higher education opportunities, lowering the barriers to entry and keeping that to be the voice of reason. SACAC also does this. Right before this webinar, I got my government relations email and was reading through it. And so, again, we are all working to this common cause. You all in Arkansas, but we are up here in Tennessee fighting the good fight, colleagues all across our SACAC states. And so being able to be involved as much or as little as you can be, and I'm going to speak on behalf of Steve here, and Kelly and P and some of our other leaders in SACAC government relations, that those things are really important, right? Showing up, supporting, the reminder, we're going to have this day. I can't be there, but I am interested. That will keep you on the radar, to keep being invited, right? To having a seat at the table when we do those in-person dates, to get that experience of sitting across from someone and really speaking your voice. Other key focus areas for education advocates right now, and these are things that I'll just pull in to be thinking about for you, are access to strong college prep curriculum and post-secondary counseling for all students. This really used to be the pillar and the hallmark of SACAC and NACAC. Now, there is so many webs, right? There are so many things happening in the government with education, so many things potentially on the horizon, that I did want to bullet these three for us to make sure that we don't lose that focus, right? When I say education is personal and it's starting to have implications in a lot of other things, I am aware of it. And also knowing, going in with a few things that you want as you're having a conversation with a legislator is really, really important, because you could go so many different directions. But at the end of the day, what is the ask? These are some of the big hallmarks that, again, as I am speaking on behalf of both NACAC and SACAC, that we want to keep pointing that arrow, shining a spotlight down upon, and not losing that focus of what's at the core. So as you step into these conversations, as you decide to pick up a phone or a call, and when you are having in-person meetings with people who can impact change, some questions that I would encourage you to consider really are starting from the beginning and assuming best intent. I know that is hard. So I have had countless of these meetings where I really do make assumptions going in. This person has always voted this way. What are we even doing here? Why are we meeting with this person? And actually, one of those people was one of the people who put me on a committee with their help task force to say, okay, you know what? I probably do need to hear this. Can you weigh in? And we had some great conversations when I was really willing to kind of listen, why are you voting this way? And there's a lot of things, but then if you don't hear that side and you don't hear that answer, you can't work to change it, right? And so increasingly as we get into echo chambers, for better or for worse, it's really important to just kind of step in and say, how do you plan to vote? Assuming outside, and let them answer that. I plan to vote this way. Okay, well, I disagree. And here's my personal story that would support otherwise. Or how could we continue to allocate these funds? And who currently informs your decisions on these policies? What voice are you listening to when it comes to education, and not the other tie-ins that may be in this bill, because this is how even though this is one line in this huge bill, this is going to really, really impact this many kids and this many teachers and this many people. And have you given thought to that? Again, we kind of go back to that. Can I share my information in case you want to ask my input in the future? This really comes up depending on when you are going to advocate and when you're planning to meet with others, because of my next bullet, which is, how is your day shaping up? Right? You get a tone when you're on the phone with someone. Are they getting 1,000 calls today and they're just marking your vote? Yes, no, maybe that, yes, no, yes, no. Or are you meeting with them kind of in the off season when they are not in a legislative session to say, is there a better time to actually talk about these that could be more productive, right? Everybody wants to go do a Hill Day when the Capitol is in session, right? When you want to go to the Hill when the legislators are there, but your legislators will be coming back to you when they are out of session. And sometimes those local offices have hours, they have different people working, and they can actually schedule time with you in times where they are not rushing off to a committee or rushing off to a session. And that can be really important. And knowing how that day is shaping up is an important question, because you want to know if someone from, and who is there before you, right? Like, who is advocating right before you, who is advocating right after you, and where do you fit in that timeline and that agenda? And I think sometimes just those listening ears and being like, those are, because everyone is there with an agenda, everyone has a topic, everyone has something of importance, and how can you differentiate yours, or how can you work to situate the importance of the education conversation when people are coming in talking about budgets, talking about gun violence, talking about all of these things. And so I think always being mindful of those pieces, because they are getting many, many asks and many requests. And so situating that and being a person to talk with and showing yourself as an expert in education will make you a person that they really want to reach out to. And then what is the best, again, that follow-up, what is the best time to meet with you more about this, or to talk with someone? Do you have an education aide? If you're not meeting with that education aide, that I could talk with more, or that you could put me in contact with, and maybe we can continue to have some productive conversations around our hopes and dreams surrounding what really could be done for your constituents. So if the first things is, if you don't know your representatives, is to know them, right? Like, hopefully either you elected them or you didn't, and you probably have a lot of feelings about that. But to know who they are, and to know what they stand for, and to know what your inroads are with them is very important. And so the Find My Representative, Find My Senator pages are very transparent. When you go to click on them, actually, I'm going to kind of like highlight here, as you're looking at, you can see what committees they are on. You can see what, where they have voted with education in the past. And again, going in with that knowledge is power, but then also being open to say, I'm actually here to change your mind about why you voted this way in the past, and how you might help support this bill in the future, can be really powerful. So these would be, and then at the state, that was the federal level, of course. At the state level, the same thing is true, though those people are also way more accessible to you. And as we were talking about the power of the states having a really big role potentially in education as we look ahead, they're probably some of our most important partners right now, and in connecting with and starting to talk about what that would look like. So I pulled up a few of the Arkansas folks. So we have, and I just kind of added these in here, because what I would do, so this is for my first example, before I would meet with someone, I'm going to look at their bio, right? And I'm going to figure out what they are doing. And then I'm going to figure out what my role is with them. Like, what am I being asked to do? Of course, like, what is my agenda item I'm coming in with? And what is my greatest on-ramp to making that a really productive conversation? So for this person, I would be looking, stepmother of 7 grown children who probably have a lot of different educational backgrounds and opinions. How do you start that conversation about who was most successful and how? This person is the CFO of an auto group, right? So as a reminder, you are the person working in the school. You are the expert. They were probably not, she was not elected to discuss for her education background. She is there for something else. And how can you be a reference to this person, whether or not you agree with all of the decisions that they are making or the legislation that they're introducing, to say, okay, I see that you are passionate about a hospital board. You are passionate about a home for children who have been displaced. How do we make those connections about those temporary homes for children who have been displaced and their access to education and higher education outcomes? And so those are all ways to do that. For Representative Collins, obviously, like, lives in Little Rock with his wife and 3 children's, we're going to make that children singular. And then thinking all of these things through, has been clearly involved with AmeriCorps. This is a different conversation. If you look up the ways that Representative Collins has voted for, sometimes these can be great pat on the back meetings, right? Like, these are ways that you can say, please keep doing this and keep your voice sound and strong. There's benefits to changing minds, and then there's also benefits to being cheerleaders for the people who are promoting the agenda items you want them to do. So both are important to meet with, just for that. For this representative, I would look here at the 4-H plugging in, like these ways that they're thinking about college and developing things. Growing Minds homeschool, clearly an interest in some education and some different education. And how do we bridge that gap to thinking about that homeschool co-op towards public schools, and why would students need a homeschool co-op, and why would we have these conversations? And really, those are the ways that I would encourage you to think about this advocacy piece and how your voice and your role in your current job plays a role. Um, so I have some now what's here at the end before I kind of pass it back to Steve. But my advice as you dive into this is to consider an issue. Maybe it was all of the things I said, or maybe it is one key issue, and decide, how are you going to tackle this? Are you going to be a representative on behalf of SACAC? Are you going to be an informed citizen of that legislator? Are you going to come? What are you going to do? And how can you amplify that message? So I know I've said the word amplify a lot today. But that really is, if advocacy or lobbying is intimidating to you, please just know that all you are doing is amplifying a message that is important. You are shining a light and amplifying something that you see a need for students, for others. And so let that guide the conversations, and don't get in the weeds on, well, I don't know if they're going to ask me about this bill and these things, and what do I give up instead? You are there as a SACAC representative to discuss, to talk about education, access to higher education, and try to let that lead and empower you to have those conversations. Because you have a lot to contribute to the state conversation, to the national conversation on higher education. And that is why you're here today. That's why you care. The education, the political, it is personal. And that's where I think storytelling and advocacy work at our level, not necessarily being a lobbyist by trade, can be so impactful. What did I miss, Steve? What else? What
No,
else do we got here?
that was fantastic, Betsy. Thank you so much. Um, personally, as someone who has worked on Capitol Hill for a few years as a legislative aide, you're
Mm.
totally spot on.
Yeah.
Question I had for you is, I was remembering the first time I walked on Capitol Hill and
Hmm.
was just kind of like awestruck by some of the folks that I would
Yeah.
see on the news. I'm kind of a
Yeah.
political junkie, so,
Yeah.
I would recognize more folks than most people do.
Sure. Sure.
Um, and then I remember, like, after met the congressman that I ended up working for, I quickly realized he's not an expert
Mm-mm.
in these topics. He has
Yeah.
us for
Right.
that. And that just kind of like allowed me to, I guess, in a sense, demystify the whole aspect of meeting with them. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people are scared to meet with legislators,
Yeah.
can you just briefly talk about like your first experience and like
Yeah.
how to like shake off those nerves for some of the
No, I
folks that might
totally
want to do
agree,
that?
because I assumed, and the first time that I went to DC, but I'll also talk about the first time in Kentucky. I was given a folder of, like, these are the pieces of legislation coming up that we are trying to get them to, we want them to vote yes, we want them to vote no. And so I kind of had this preconceived notion that I had to be an expert on that policy legislation, like on that piece. And so I'm reading about it and reading all the ins and outs. And while I do think it's important to know what all it entails, right? Because a lot of these bills have a lot of different things, right? So you don't want to get shut down your first meeting in being told, well, I'm not voting for that because of something that's totally arbitrary. And then you're like, well, my time here, I don't know anything about that. But I do think over time, what I learned is I am the expert in education. Like, I have done this. I know why these outcomes are important for students, and that's who I work with, and that's why I'm here. Really does help me to know that my voice is important, and that it'll be heard as long as it's taken in that, right? And so I've been with multiple teams going to these meetings, and sometimes you do get legislative aides who do know it all, right? Like, and
Mhm.
so I think in some ways it's asking the question of them. I think some of my best meetings were, how could you use us? Like, we here, we've given up our time to drive to the Capitol or fly to the Capitol, because we care a lot. And so how can we be helpful in our state? How can we be helpful to you, the work you're doing? And then how can we better understand and share that message back to our people? So I was often met with that. I felt like too, like we really are trying here, but this is tied to this and this, and so being able to just say, and again, I think those cheerleader meetings too, someone told me once that they were like, I was like, why are we going here? Shouldn't we be spending our time with people where we need to change the conversation, where we need to change minds? And really, I think it is both, but going to those meetings will empower you too. And so when I scheduled them, of course, it's real nice when you can, do two kind of opposing positions and mix those up with people who definitely are supporting education initiatives at those highest levels, because then you get motivated by those. And you can also name drop those who, I just met with so and so, I just met with. I think that can be really helpful too, in saying, they're considering this, or the message that I was giving them, so they know you're kind of coming at it to talk to a lot of different people.
No, that's awesome. Want to reinforce something you said earlier. Education is personal,
Yeah.
but as the famous Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, used to say, all politics is local,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
so one of the things that I remember as a legislative aide is I mean, I would get really stuck in my bubble of research and
Hmm.
trying to become that expert so that I
Yeah.
could quickly answer those questions to the
Yeah.
congressman or the senator.
Yeah.
Um, but what really moved the needle, at least for me, to
Hmm.
bring to my boss were stories, right?
Yes. Good.
You
Good.
Yeah, so I would sit there and I think a lot of my colleagues back then felt the same way as well.
Mhm.
They'd be like, "Oh, I didn't even think of that," right?
Yeah. Yes.
And I hope that it's helpful for folks that do want to get involved with advocacy to just understand that
Mhm.
it's not as complicated as it may seem to be. It's
Right.
really just tell your story. You live
Right.
and breathe education,
Mhm.
in your professional life. These folks don't,
Right.
right? And they're
Right.
looking at budget proposals
Yeah.
and legislation and how to move regulations, et cetera. You tell that one story that can completely change things.
Yeah.
And going back to what you're saying about maybe like a meeting to pat someone on the back, that could be someone that joins your coalition.
Mhm.
That could be someone who tells you who to reach out to that they need help getting something,
Yes,
passed.
exactly, exactly. And sometimes listening for that, like who would be helpful to meet with, is they're like, you need to get so and so on board, and I'm like, what do you mean me? You need to get. But of course, like being able to be a tool for them to, are you meeting with this person, or who else should I meet with? And again, you're meeting mostly with people in your state, so that's why it takes a team effort of going together. It's also why SACAT can be valuable, though, because there are states doing this differently, and so at that national level, I've been able to go. When I was in Kentucky, I went to, of course, Kentucky legislators, and then in Tennessee, but I would go, I've been with groups to go to South Carolina, to go to Virginia, to go to other states where you can well, I'm coming from this perspective and I'm with someone from your state, but it is kind of a different voice. Like we're all working together with this across
Hmm.
the Southeast, and how, this is our initiative all across the South, can be a good voice too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you know, going up to the Hill, whether you're going to DC or, here in Little Rock,
Mm.
may seem daunting, don't know where to go, don't know how to navigate it.
Yeah.
One of the
Yeah.
simplest things that you can do is, kind of like what Betsy was showing you, just to go online, look up
Mhm.
your state representative. It's very easy, user friendly to find that. And all the state representatives and state senators have their own email addresses and phone numbers, and you can send a quick email. And honestly, like, you know, a lot of folks reaching out to them, a lot of people contacting them, the more that we do that, it
Yeah.
forms a movement. And a lot of times that does move the needle,
It does.
especially at a more local area like Arkansas,
Yeah.
you know.
And what I was most surprised about was, my legislator that reached out, that actually was a Tennessee person that I never thought would reach back out. But because we were just able to sit and have 15 minutes, and I said, do you have some time? And we sat for 15 or 20 minutes. But it is someone who I would have said on the surface of their commercials, I don't know if I like this guy, right? Like, I don't know that I agree on many, many things. But we had a great conversation. And then that summer he reached out to say, we're doing these things. So someone saved a card somewhere, right? Like someone remembered a story and said, what about that person? And then was able to like kind of find you. And so to me, that is probably the most affirming part, it's very rare that in a 10-minute meeting, right, you are going to change an immediate mind. But being able to like start a relationship and then to go back. This was someone who I'd gone to 2 or 3 years in a row. And so finally, like we just were and he was like, all right, fine. I'm not going away, right? I'm
Mhm.
going to just keep coming to ask. I'm going to do so politely. And the worst you can tell, I tell my students all the time, if you ask politely, the worst they can say is no. And so for me, that is kind of my approach to advocacy too, is I'm going to come in, I'm going to explain why it's important, and I'm going to do my best to help you understand. And if at the end of the day you disagree, you disagree, but I've done my part in
Mhm.
sharing my information.
No, exactly. And I have maybe this might be my last question because I know you got to go soon.
Yeah.
But politics today, not to go
Mhm.
too much into politics, it's kind of
Yeah.
nasty. I mean,
Yes.
just
Yeah.
let's be honest.
It is.
Um, and so, we're looking at things, here at the state level and really across the country, where DI is a bad word and
Mm-hmm.
things that have identified disparities that, a lot of
Yeah.
students face, get lumped in and
Mhm.
clouded over this whole DEI thing
Yes.
or, I was talking to an educator earlier this week, and low income is a bad word too, right? And so how are we going to be able to provide the resources and the opportunities for those that need it if like that's
Mhm.
the politics that we face? And so my
I
question
know.
to you is like, what advice would you give those educators that really want to do something, but at the same time there's a politics of fear,
Yeah,
right?
there
And
is. So I think, and this may be, I don't know if this is a bold statement or a cowardly statement, or I actually can't decide how it'll be taken generally, but I think those kids, if educators are who I believe them to be, those kids are going to get the care that they need. And in making these policy changes, they're making it harder. And so that's the piece that I would continue to say is like educators, teachers don't teach willy-nilly. Like no one just gets into teaching and is like, man, I don't love this, I'm going to just keep doing it. And so people that work with students are there to work with students because they care about helping them form their identities. They care about helping them become who they're designed, like called to be in the world. They care about advancing their opportunities. And so that conversation that I would have with anyone enacting policy is you're making it harder for people who love kids to do their jobs, right? And so how can you make it easier for these people who have dedicated their lives to the betterment of kids, make it easier to do the work of education and learning? And how do we continue to remove barriers as opposed, so
Mhm.
however you can get at the heart of that. Again, no matter you have 7 step, like I think again, coming back to that personal message, you have 7 step children, you have these, how would you
Mhm.
feel about this? And again, maybe you like the answer you get sometimes and maybe you don't, but still being able to chip away at how can we keep making this easier for every student, right? Like not just a privileged few, but for so many, to access what they need
Mhm.
and to learn and to grow and then become engaged citizens. I feel like that is the term that I always come back to there too, because no matter how you feel about certain pieces of higher education or certain components to it, your task is to have an educated and skilled labor and workforce for your state. And so people cannot do that if they don't have counseling. People get students over time. There's data and there are stories, and merging the two of those to being really thoughtful, contributing citizens is going to usually get it to the heart of every person you meet with.
Mhm. No, that's awesome, fantastic. You know, like you were saying before, assume best intentions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Our politics are crazy on when we look at
They
it on our
are, they
TV,
are.
but you also
And
have to,
it's a tough time to do it. So I don't want to downplay that either, right? Like
yeah,
I do agree in having done this now for 15 years, it is
yeah,
it is different now. I mean, right, like we feel
mhm,
some of that. And still our meetings don't have to be like, we can still bring in that core voice of why kids need this,
right,
and feel confident in that voice, even if we don't get the actions we want.
right. And then there's a saying that, I work with a lot of veterans. If not me, then who? I think that's
Right,
something
right,
that applies
right.
to us as well.
It really does.
Assume best intentions of the representatives because they are human as well.
Yeah, yeah,
But they may be clouded about politics, may be in their bubble because of that. But when they start
absolutely.
hearing more stories like ours,
Mhm.
that will definitely move the needle. So
Yeah.
Betsy, thank you so much
Yeah,
for the
thank you for
wonderful
having me. This
presentation.
was fun. This was a fun conversation. And if anybody to the point of the slide, if anybody needs me for anything or wants to reach out or just make a connection, I'd love to connect with you and appreciate this time, Steve. This was fun, and it's prompting me because I had to miss Tennessee this year to get back in it and to do the follow-up work for my part here too. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Safe travels.
Yes,
And
thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Everybody enjoy the rest of your content. You got some great speakers up ahead.
awesome. Thanks, Betsy.
Thanks.
All right, folks. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next part. So I'm just gonna share my screen real quick here. Um, right. Okay. So wonderful presentation from Betsy. Just really quickly want to reinforce the fact that um, as educators, counselors, admissions officers, um, we have the stories that are going to be impactful for the legislators, and getting those stories to them can really move the needle. And I can speak from personal experience on that as someone who worked on the other side as a legislative aide. So I highly encourage you to do that. You can do anything as simple as send them an email. They have their email contact information. If you look up your state representative or state senator, you can call, your federal congressman. Even if you think it's not going to do anything, trust me, like the more folks they hear, the more it does move the needle, regardless of politics. Um, so with that, I just wanted to make a few announcements because I wanted to give Betsy some time to give her presentation. Um, Correct me if I'm wrong, Darren, if you can hear me. I believe today is the last day to register for the SACAC annual conference.
Yes, sir,
Um,
it is.
Okay, so I just wanted to give a quick plug-in for that. If you haven't already, it looks like it's going to be a great event. Um, on that note, if you are not a SACAC member, I highly encourage you to, sign up to be a member. I think the fee is $45 a year. Offers a lot of great resources, great presentations like we have today. So encourage you to join SACAC. We also have the Sweet Tea Tour that's coming up in June. It's great college visits. Darren, I don't know if you want to do another plug for this. If you've been to a Sweet Tea Tour before.
Yeah, so I can't turn my screen on, my camera on right now, but yeah, the Sweet Tea College Tour is amazing. It's a great way to actually travel out to a state that has a lot of the colleges that your students may be applying to. As a counselor, it's really hard for us to travel during the school year, so during the summertime, this is a great way to just being able to visit a whole bunch of campuses in 1 week. You'll visit about 2 or 3 colleges per day, go on the tours, meet the deans, the admissions counselors, and really get a feel for what life is like on those college campuses. The beautiful part also about SACAC is we try to make it accessible for all members, regardless of if you're a public school, private school, CBO, or independent consultants. So we have our free access membership, which I know Steve said our membership is $45 per year. But if you work for a public school or a CBO, membership is actually free of charge. So you can hop online and just register at any point and take advantage of that. And members also get discounts for events like the Sweet Tea College Tour and our annual conference registration.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren. And thanks for the reminder about the free access to that as well. Also, Darren and Eric, I made you guys co-hosts, so when it's your turn, you can turn on your camera as well now. All right. Well, with that, I will give my presentation. Um, and I will give you just a little bit of background of who I am. So I'm Steve Colley. Like I said before, I am the SACAC's Arkansas Government Relations Chair. Been involved with SACAC for the past about 4 years now. I'm also an independent educational consultant. I'm a professional member of the Independent Educational Consultants Association, the IECA. I have a college consulting service here in Little Rock called Waypoint College Consulting, where I serve students across the country and a few international students. One of my specialties is helping students with the application process for service academies and ROTC scholarships. But I also have a large array of other students that do lots of different things, right? From students just wanting to go to their state school or students that want to get a scholarship and um, music programs or athletes trying to get recruited or other specialty items. As a member of the IECA, I've learned a tremendous amount with great colleagues that are available, for that type of work. Um, the other thing that I love doing is I'm a board member of Mamás Unidas Little Rock, and we have an initiative called the Mijo program, which serves the Hispanic community. Um, and we provide a variety of different services that I'll kind of go over in the next presentation a little bit. And so that's, giving back to my community. My mother immigrated from Peru when she was 18 with no money and no language, undocumented. And so everything she did with the mentors that she was able to get for me, I wanted to give back. So I'm definitely doing that, and I'm really enjoying that. So I've a MPP from Harvard. I went to the Naval Academy. I also have college consulting or college counseling certificate from UCLA. And so I have loved the work that I've been doing for the past 5 years. And working with a lot of admissions officers across the country, going to a lot of the conferences and meeting with them and hearing what they have to say. And working with a lot of my colleagues, getting this understanding of holistic admissions. And really what I believe is really important is how to develop a narrative for students who are thinking about going to schools that are a little more selective, schools that are looking at applications from a holistic perspective. Okay. And so that's kind of the view here. But I also feel like there's a lot of kind of life coaching that goes along with it that is beneficial for any student. And so I just want to share some of my own learnings from that, and I'll go ahead and get started. So this session is going to be all about understanding how students can craft a compelling narrative in their college applications and how we as counselors or admissions professionals can help them do that effectively. First, I'd like to touch on why narratives matter in holistic admissions. Colleges aren't just about looking at grades and test scores. Sometimes they want to understand who the student is, what drives them, how they'll contribute to a campus community. Then I want to break down some of the key elements of a strong narrative, things that I've seen. And I think a lot of folks will have done, looked at it from different perspectives or learned different ways of doing this. These are things like personal identity, communicating passions, experiences, and future goals. Um, then I want to talk about how to align a student's narrative in their application, making sure their essays, activities, recommendations all reinforce the same story. And then I'd like to show you a couple examples that I have seen that I'm sure are pretty similar to what most of you guys have seen. Some common pitfalls that students fall into. We'll take a look at that. And so holistic admissions. When we talk about this, what do we really mean? This approach goes beyond just looking at a student's GPA and test scores. It's about understanding the whole person. Colleges aren't just admitting applicants, they're admitting future students who will contribute to campus life, bring unique perspectives, and take advantage of the opportunities available to them. This is a process of evaluating not just academic achievement, but also a student's unique experiences, passions, challenges, and character. It allows admissions officers to get a full picture of who the student is, where they come from, and where they're going. So, for example, we think of two students who might have the same GPA and ACT score, but the stories could be completely different. One might be a first generation student who worked part-time to support their family, while the other had access to prestigious internships and summer programs. Holistic admissions helps colleges contextualize. I think context is so important, about their experiences and understand the student's journey, humanizing the numbers that admissions officers look at. So we're going to explore how students can craft a compelling narrative and highlight their unique experiences and makes them stand out. So this is a graphic that I I tend to show a lot of folks, a lot of my students when I first start working with them. And if you just submit an application and they look at numbers on the surface level, this is what they see. What kind of curriculum have you had? Do you have a rigorous curriculum, basic curriculum, and how does that compare with the school report? What kind of activities have you done? What are your test scores, GPA, accomplishments? And I know some admissions officers will quantify this. But what I believe is more important, and I think what colleges, and selective colleges are looking for is the stuff below, the intangibles. How does a student demonstrate intellectual vitality, right? How are they connected to their community? How have they demonstrated self-awareness or a sense of purpose that has taken them along a journey of growth and a trajectory towards something that they potentially might want to do? Even if they are undecided on their approach, at least it proves to the college that they're in the right place, right? How do they evaluate their character and values and demonstrate where they learned that from? I think these are really important, and it's really difficult, I think, for a lot of students to think about this as they are in the exploratory phase of their life. It's important for us as counselors to understand like how to draw this out, from them and help them articulate, these intangibles. And so what I tell students is from a lot of the admissions officers that I've talked to across the spectrum of selectivity in colleges, generally what they want is three answers. One, who is this person? Two, will this person contribute something of value to our campus? And three, is this person articulate? Does this student generally know what he or she wants? And so what I tell students is your message will tell a story about you and highlight these characteristics while you're pursuing essentially your high school record. Right. So why does a narrative matter? First, I think narrative differentiates students in a competitive field, right? Thousands of applicants have strong GPAs, test scores, and impressive extracurriculars. And if an admissions officer is reviewing, I don't know, about 50 applications in a single day, what do they remember? You know, maybe not so much the stats, but the stories. A student's narrative can help them stand out and help the admissions officers connect them beyond the numbers. So another example, two students are applying to a top tier college with nearly identical academic profiles. One writes a generic essay about their love for science. The other shares a compelling story about growing up in a rural town with limited STEM opportunities, building their own chemistry experiments at home, and eventually starting a science club at school. Who do you think the admissions officer is going to remember? Also, a strong narrative highlights trajectory, motivation, and personal growth. I think colleges want to see how a student's past experiences have shaped their interests and goals. They want to understand not just what a student has done, but why. I think a strong narrative will show how past challenges have influenced a student's aspirations or how they have grown in resilience, self-awareness, curiosity. For some students that can't really identify a large challenge that they had to overcome, maybe it's a compilation of different experiences that we weave together in a thematic thread to showcase different values, qualities, and traits about them. And finally, I think a good narrative shows how a student will contribute to the campus. I think at least the admissions officers that I've met, they're not just asking, is this student a good fit for our college? They're asking, what will this student bring to our community? I think they're seeking students who bring unique perspectives, leadership, and impact, and a well-crafted narrative can help them see a student and how they'll engage. So, I mean, here's some components when you're thinking about a strong student narrative, right? And when I talk about narrative, what I'm really talking about, and I think I put it in here somewhere, right here. We're looking at a typical application requirements for a highly selective college, right? And Darren, you were an admissions officer, so feel free to jump in and correct me on anything or add to what I'm saying here.
Okay.
Uh, but we're looking at generally a list of items for an application, and the things I highlighted in red, in my opinion, is what forms a personal narrative. And what I tell students is that you're 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 building your story. It's almost like a book, and every piece has different layers in it, right? That complement each other. Your activities list and resume provides context. Letters of recommendations validates some of the things that you have, or it communicates something in addition to something that you talk about in your personal statement or your supplemental essays. If there is an interview, so one of the things that I do also is I'm a admissions liaison for the U.S. Naval Academy. It's called the Blue and Gold Officer, and I do interviews here in Arkansas. Those interviews give us an opportunity to see their personality and see how just everything kind of comes together, right? And so, really kind of strategizing on this narrative, I think, can be really helpful. And understanding that when I'm talking about narrative, I'm talking about how all these pieces come together. So, going back to the components of a strong student narrative, um, every student brings a unique perspective shaped by their family, their culture, their values, their experiences, right? That personal identity and background, I think, is important. And I find that a lot of students, they live in their bubble and they don't think that their bubble is that important or that their bubble is unique, right? But when we look at it and we step into that bubble, it is different, right? We're all different. We're all human. And I try to show my students that what they are talking about their family or their identity, um, shapes who they are. And I think some aspects of those could be good to talk about. Um, a strong narrative should also show what excites the student intellectually. um, I mean, with my Mijo students and my Masanidas, they're all high achieving students. But I think I harp a lot on intellectual curiosity. You know, are you fascinated in STEM? Do you like, and how are you approaching that? Uh, maybe we can find someone to, job shadow with him, and maybe that tells a story later on. Um, you know, Have you pursued independent projects outside of school? Maybe we can think about a passion project. Colleges don't want students who just get good grades. They want students who are intellectually engaged and eager to explore new ideas, and having the ability to develop some initiative to pursue some of these passions, right? And I think by talking about that, it kind of shows that we have to engage these students way early on, not right before they start putting the application together, to help them see what this story could turn into, right? And regardless if they go to a highly selected college or not, I think that just develops them as better people so they can understand who they are. They can learn aspects about leadership and initiative and discipline, and have a sense of purpose that gives them happiness and fulfillment. Um, you know, Activities that they do, all our students are doing various activities. How does it connect to their overall story? It might not seem obvious at first, um, but do they have a deep passion for something specific or diverse set of skills? Have they led something? Or maybe they're shy and they created something, um, or influenced something meaningful as part of a group of students. Um, Colleges also want students who have faced challenges and grown from them. Okay. And if they haven't faced challenges, having the self-awareness to know how they've grown. Um, so, um, a lot of students that I work with when we're going through the college essay writing process, it's this fear of like, I can't write a good essay because I don't have like some big challenge that I've overcome. It's like, no, that's okay. You've grown somehow. I mean, you're in high school. Let's evaluate that. Let's inventory all the things that you have done. And I'll kind of show you some of the ways that I do that. And then finally, the future vision and impact. A strong narrative should show not only what a student has done, but where they're going. If they're able to demonstrate a trajectory going towards something, and that college that they're going to is going to be that rocket booster for them, that's going to be very compelling for that admissions officer to want them in their school, I believe. Um, so how do we make a strong narrative come across clearly in an application? Um, I think this 3 C's framework is helpful. So the first one, consistency. The best applications have a clear, unified story. If a student is passionate about public health, their essays, extracurriculars, and recommendations should, in certain ways, reinforce that. If their activities feel disconnected from their essays, the application loses impact. Secondly, coherence. Admissions officers should be able to follow a student's journey. Past experiences should logically connect to their future goals. So if a student says they want to be a doctor, but they've done no medical related activities or academics, their student lacks credibility, their story lacks credibility, right? And then finally, character. Um, numbers get students in the door, but personality, values, and emotional depth, I think, gets them admitted. Colleges want students who are reflective and self-aware, not just those with impressive resumes, right? So an application should somehow reveal their mindset, their motivations, their growth. Um, I talk to students who want to go to the Naval Academy or service academies. Um, it's okay to show growth. It's okay to be humble, right? We're not looking for, the Hollywood version of military leaders. We're looking for someone who is willing to work as a team, right? Um, so 3 C's in action. To see this in action, let's look at it. Let's look at this example. So I want you to imagine a student passionate about climate change. A weak application might be someone who just lists AP environmental science and a few generic activities. I think a strong application would show consistency, coherence, and character by demonstrating that this person conducted research on local water quality, right? Just demonstrating that initiative and impact. Um, led an environmental club in their school, demonstrating commitment and leadership. Interned at a sustainability nonprofit in their local area, demonstrating real world application. Writing an essay about growing up near polluted water and deciding to take action. There's that personal connection. I feel like something like this makes the student's story compelling and memorable. Instead of just listing achievements, they're telling a story that admissions officers can connect with. And I think that's what makes the narrative powerful. Now, here's the problem. A lot of students don't know what they want to do, right? A lot of students are exploring in high school and may be doing a lot of activities that don't seem to connect. And that is perfectly okay, because what we can demonstrate are more of the values and the skill sets that they've acquired during their journey, and maybe demonstrate some interest that they might have discovered in that process. And that demonstrates a trajectory as well, right? So I don't want you to think that, we're looking for perfect students who have it figured out from ninth grade, because I don't think it'll be very few and far between, that we can find that. But we can definitely work and help them to figure that out. And I'm going to show you kind of some of the things I do with that. So aligning the narrative across the application, you know, I think, breaking down the components of the application, and showing like how it can reinforce the story. First, if we look at the personal statement, this is where the student's core identity and values come through. It should introduce key themes about who they are, what matters to them, For example, a student interested in engineering might start a personal story with, the day I built my first robot in my garage, I realized something catchy that hooks the reader, at the beginning. Next, these supplemental essays, you know, I think we've seen these before. These are going to be, why this college? Right. And I think a strong response doesn't just list, oh, it's a beautiful campus, um, some generic praise. I feel like it connects a student's interest to specific opportunities at that school, right? Here's that student once again who wants to study, engineering, and might say, at whatever school, I hope to research AI ethics with Dr. Smith, right? And that student has gone into the university's, engineering department and found Dr. Smith and found Dr. Smith's research and some of the things that he's done in AI ethics. And I think by demonstrating that they know what they're going for, that to that level of specificity, I think really demonstrates a compelling argument that, okay, this kid knows what he wants. Activities list, this demonstrates interest, um, interest in their passions, right? And they don't all have to be robotics and coding and STEM mentorship. There could be aspects of different other things um, that show other qualities and traits that could connect with wanting to be a good engineer, right? Maybe they were involved in a arts and crafts club, mentoring young kids in arts and crafts. That demonstrates creativity and leadership, right? That can be good for an engineer. So, we can get creative with, how we demonstrate those layers. And then, of course, letters of recommendations, reinforcing the student's narrative by describing their curiosity, leadership, and perseverance. A great letter might show that this student asked deeper questions than I've taught. Um, I think good letters of recommendations will offer certain talking points that demonstrates a connection to the student at a personal level, that they've, not only just witnessed in class, but are able to talk a little bit more than a generic recommendation. And that can be very helpful for them. Communicating with a student ahead of time, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? Um, what activities have you done to provide context for that letter of recommendation? A lot of times I have my students offer up some talking points, if the teacher or counselor is willing to take that. I think some of you have seen, brag sheets where a student, kind of lays out what they're trying to do and their goals and everything else to help formulate a letter of recommendation that is more targeted, for the student and helpful to the student. And then, of course, interviews. Not everyone will do interviews, but if they do, it's an opportunity to expand on their story with some anecdotes, demonstrate some personality. Um, so, one red flag, though, is if a student claims to be passionate about, like I was saying before, medicine, but has no medical related activities, or narrative lacks credibility. And it's not just medicine, it could be any other topic, right? But maybe they didn't go and volunteer at a hospital and go do all this medical type stuff. Maybe if they show different values, qualities, and traits that align with a doctor and tell a compelling reason why that aligns with being a doctor, that could be a very interesting narrative. So a strong application is consistent across all components. At the end of the day, each piece should reinforce the student's unique story. So kind of wanted to share a couple case studies here. Um, so first we have student A. Let's call this person the future educator. So this student struggled with a learning disability in elementary school, but instead of letting it define her, she worked hard to develop strategies that helped her succeed. As she gained confidence, she started tutoring younger students facing similar challenges. Eventually, she created a literacy program at her local library to help struggling readers. Her activities, essays, and even letters of recommendations reinforce one clear theme: a passion for education and advocacy. It's easy to see why this student wants to major in education and why they'll bring real value to, the campus that she wants to go to. Um, right. So when you look at this type of application, it's a great example of those three C's. It's consistent, it's coherent, and it's full of character. And I think that's the goal that students should have in their applications, right? But it might not be that clear, cut that like this student had. The student knew what she wanted like a long time before she even considered applying to college, right? Not all students are going to have that figured out. Um, so then let's look at another example, the weak narrative and how to fix it. So here we have student B. Let's call him the check the box applicant. All right. So this student is involved in a lot. And I'm sure we've seen students like this: varsity soccer, debate team, on the environmental club, hospital volunteering, summer coding camp. This is great. This is a very involved student. But we don't see any clear connection between any of those activities. Their personal statement is generic, doesn't reinforce a central passion, nothing ties together. And as a result, their application feels scattered and forgettable. So, how do we fix this? First, I would say let's try to identify 2 to 3 key themes that reflect their true interests, right? I might sit down with them and inventory their values, right? So I have a list of values and I have them select 10 of them, and then we narrow down to 5, and then we narrow down to 3. And then I have them talk to me about why those 3 values are important to them, and they can share some stories along with that, right? Um, I'm sure there are other ways that you folks could probably bring that out, but helping them brainstorm 2 to 3 key themes that reflect their true interests. Next, I think rewriting their essay to connect those experiences rather than just listing them. All right, so give a plug in for the college essay guy. If you haven't looked him up, if you Google college essay guy, he's phenomenal. A lot of free resources, great content for students when they're trying to figure out how to develop their essays. One of the things that he shows is the montage essay, right? So if it's that student that doesn't have that, you know, challenging story and how they overcame it, and they just have a lot of things like this great student has done, um, it's showing 3 or 4 different experiences and then tying it together with a thematic thread. Um, oh, thanks, Aaron. So that can be a very creative way of showcasing who you are, and then it gives the ability to maybe use some metaphors as well to tie into a core passion, right? Um, I'll give you a couple examples. I had a student of mine. Um, she wrote a montage essay with music, right? So all of us have heard that song that we haven't heard for a long time ago, and it just sparks a memory, right? It gives us a flashback about something, right? So she played on that, and she talked about 3, I think 4 different songs, and it tied into different moments in her life. And those moments were ability for her to showcase some things that she learned about herself or highlighted certain values about herself. And then at the end, she tied it in and came kind of in full circle with a metaphor on music and what she wants to do into the future. It was a beautifully written essay. Um, Admissions officer actually wrote back to her personally saying it was a beautiful essay, and I was shocked. There's another example that the college essay guy gives, which is student has a bunch of stickers behind her laptop, and she talks about her stickers. And in each short paragraph, it describes a sticker, where she got it from, but then it highlights certain characteristics, qualities, traits, values about her. And then when it all comes together, you kind of get the sense and the theme of who this person is and how it ties into a core passion and where she wants to go and what she wants to do. Okay. So, key takeaway: strong application isn't about quantity, it's about cohesion and depth. Um, all right.
Can I add to that?
Yes,
Excuse me.
please.
Sorry, y'all. So I used to work for a small liberal arts college, highly selective, as an assistant dean. And during my training, my supervisor at the time would tell me about the cohesion and the depth of the essays. And one way she put it, I always loved, is that if your student could drop their essay in the hallway and anyone could pick it up and it could apply to them, then it wasn't deep enough. They need to go a little bit further. What they're looking for and what we're all looking for is one that the intangibles really. We get the GPA, we get the ACT score. It's the in-betweens. That and factor is what I call it. So, colleges expect the 4.0s or the 3.5s and the good ACT scores, but the things in between that really make your students unique. This is the opportunity for them to really highlight who they are, why they will be a great fit on our campus, both academically and culturally. Just to add a little bit of context about the case study, I remember one of my favorite essays of all time. It was super random. I opened it up and started reading, and the first paragraph was about a square, about how the student, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, about how the student's favorite shape was a square. And I remember thinking, like, this is really random. I hope they're not going to give me 650 words about a square. But what it was actually about is how she found herself in squares all the time. She was a varsity swimmer. She played soccer. She was an academic. The classroom was a square. And then her favorite square ball was her bedroom, which is also square. So it just showed me all the different aspects of her life in a really unique and creative way. And that is how great essays really stand out from the crowd.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren, for your personal experience with that. I appreciate you being there and reinforcing this from your perspective as a former admissions officer. Um, but yeah, I mean, just like you said, I think we remember stories, right? It kind of goes back to the advocacy thing that we were talking about with Betsy. Working in legislation, yeah, I'd have folks that come and talk to me about just the most like wonky numbers stuff and make a strong case, but then it wouldn't be very memorable. It might go into our own calculations, but then I get that one story, right? And that would be memorable and that would move the needle. And I feel it's the same way here. I feel stories are very powerful, right? And can really humanize those numbers that admissions officers look at. Um, so helping students shape their story. I look at this from three main components. One is the resume or the activities list. How are we communicating, or how's the student communicating the things that they have done, right? It's not just a list of, oh, this is what the organization is, and I'm the vice president of it, and then done. No, I think what's more impactful is being able to demonstrate what they've done, but to be able to quantify it in their resume to demonstrate impact, right? So instead of saying, um, assisted in a fundraiser for my debate team, it could be helped organize a fundraiser that raised, $5,000 to send 22 students to the state debate, tournament or whatever. I'm making this up, right? That demonstrates impact rather than the other one is kind of open-ended, not really sure, how powerful that could be. Um, so helping them with that, helping them with, you know, how to phrase the what they say in the resume, and to be able to showcase, their strengths. Um, a lot of students are humble, shy, don't feel like they're enough. Um, and I think bringing that out of them can be really, really powerful. Then when we go into letters of recommendations, what I do is I have the student uh, send the resume after talking to the teacher, the counselor, the mentor, whoever's going to write the letter of recommendation, make sure that they're willing to do it. But also making sure that they're the right person for it. That's going to be the right person for the story, right? If you're going into a STEM major, do you have a good connection with your chemistry teacher or, or one of your STEM teachers, right? And what kind of talking points can they discuss about you on your behalf? And sharing those talking points with them and requesting that they maybe use that and having that conversation with them can go a long way, right? Along with looking at your resume, looking at what schools you're trying to apply to have context. That can be very helpful and impactful. And then lastly, of course, obviously, are the essays. And we definitely talked about that. Um, One thing I wanted to show you here, helping those students who feel lost, all teenagers are in their exploratory phase of their life. This is a model that we use with the Highlands Ability Battery, and I would encourage you to take a look at the Highlands Ability Battery. You can look it up online. I'm a certified consultant for the Highlands Ability Battery. Essentially, what it is, it's a aptitude test, evaluating your natural abilities through objective timed work samples to highlight what those abilities are that are your strengths. They demonstrate patterns with those abilities, and I think it is very insightful on how to best utilize that in a work environment, or in this case, school. Okay. Um, I say that not to necessarily make a plug for the Highlands Ability Battery, but to show you this whole person model, which I really like that they've created. So at any point in our life, we are at a certain career development cycle. Us being counselors, we're in a certain part of our career, looking for the next step, whatever that may be. For these high school students, that next step in their career development cycle is going to be college. Um, right. So that's one small piece of that puzzle. Next are their abilities. What comes naturally to you? A lot of people don't know what their abilities are, and they confuse them with skill sets, right? And when you look at professionals who are dissatisfied with their careers and are desperate to make a pivot, what has happened is they've developed a set of skills that have made them good at their job, but they're not utilizing their natural abilities to allow them to feel fulfilled. Your abilities are something that is kind of like a fingerprint that you're born with, that gets more fully developed, post puberty. And if you're able to understand what those abilities are, it can really set you down the right path. Question is, how do we assess those? Right. So there are a lot of different platforms. Highlands Ability Battery is one of them. The Johnson O'Connor Foundation does that in person. There's also U Science. I don't know if some of you have looked at U Science. It's pretty accessible for a lot of counselors. There's also 16 personalities will kind of give you a sense of your abilities, sort of, although that's more of a survey. Um, and then when we look at skill sets, if we sat down and brainstorm and inventory the students' skill sets in the context of going to college or a profession, they're going to know a little bit more about themselves. Um, and then interests, what fascinates you? When we talk about career interests, right? We're looking at the ONET a career interest profiler, or it could be the strong interest inventory. There's various assessments out there that will show what kind of careers might be a good fit for a student. Um, Personal style. Are you an extrovert? Are you an introvert? Are you a specialist or a generalist? And how do those combine to fit a personal style on how you interact with others? Family dynamics are important here, right? I tell my students when I was, you know, 18 years old, I was ready to leave my family and go off and do my own thing. Everyone's different, right? I have some students in the Mijo program where the Hispanic community, our culture is to stay united with the family, right? So some of those students want to stay close to home for that reason. Um, Now, as I am 40 years old, I have a 4-year-old, we have one on the way. That changes, my calculus on what I'm going to do. And then we can evaluate values, kind of like I was describing before. There's a different assessments on how to do that. And then talking about goals, right? You got to keep in mind some students might have more of a shorter time frame orientation towards goal setting than other students have, right? This is actually an ability that is looked at in the Highlands Ability Battery, right? So understanding how to advise that student to think a little bit more longer term, or for that student who wants to think way long term to kind of break it down in actionable steps can be helpful. So if we put all this together, I feel confident enough that it will provide a level of clarity to the student to know where they want to go, what they're trying to do, and could inform that story or could inform that decision in a major for their applications. Um, and then here, the mindset for holistic admissions, and this is what I preach to my students a lot. One, growth mindset. Embrace the challenges, persist through obstacles, but always improve. It's okay to fail as long as we learn from it. I, I preach to my students all the time, curiosity. Don't just have curiosity, put legs on that curiosity. Engage in expanding your ideas and seek answers. Sometimes that adventure can become great stories. Effort and work ethic, right? Resiliency and hard work is very valued. Um, and showcasing self-discipline and how did you achieve that? How did you learn that? And finally, for all students, reminding them that they belong, right? Have the confidence that you belong and you are capable as any student in any university, whether it's selective or not, right? We all put our pants on the same way. Okay, we're all human. So, and I tell my students, like, don't compare yourself with other students. We all have different backgrounds that make us unique, and we all bring lots of value. So, I think it's an important reminder for students, especially nowadays. And with that, I will leave it up to any questions that you may have. But in the interest of time, I will move on to the next one. And Darren, I would like if you have any final comments as a former admissions officer and also in your current role.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think all that was spot on. I am going to tap on a lot of the things you said from a more socioeconomic and cultural standpoint a little bit later. But I do think, just as an admissions counselor, I know our students sometimes get nervous and freeze up talking to, people that they feel are going to make decisions on their next 4 years. And one thing that really surprised me as an admissions counselor was that one, it's a subjective part of it. We all know that. But also how little power the admissions counselor actually has. A lot of it really has to do with the rubric that the school is using. And one great way to kind of navigate that would, again, we get the GPA, we get the ACT score, but getting your students to check those boxes as far as intellectual curiosity. Um, the students that learn differently, that like to think outside the box, that can make those really interesting mental connections between math class and history class and biology class, and three things that seem like they don't relate but can put it together in their own unique way. Colleges love that. And if they can actually show that they are growing in that discipline and are taking steps to increase that foundation, that helps them out tremendously. And then holistic admissions, is kind of in the word. They're looking at the entire student, the whole student, 9th through 12th grade, and seeing how they grew in that discipline over the years is one thing that admissions counselors truly look for and love to see.
Awesome.
All right, try
Thanks,
not to
Darren.
hop in because I could talk about this stuff all day. So
Oh, I know
sorry.
you can. Yeah, no, but I appreciate that. Can't wait to hear what you have to say. Um, for the side of things that you do as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Um, so we have Eric Brown. He's a graduate student from the Clinton School of Public Service. And Eric, do you want to share your screen or
Yeah, absolutely. So,
and you also have access to the camera. There you go. Yeah.
okay. I was gonna say my screen is your screen currently, I believe. Actually, it's not the same. Um, can you guys see my screen? Oh
Not
no,
yet.
press share. That would be helpful.
There you go. If you go to present, yeah, right there.
Alrighty.
All right.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's been really nice. I've gotten to work with Steve over these last couple months, with his organization, Mamas Unidas. I am, as he said, a Clinton School candidate, and so I'm getting my master's degree in public service at the Clinton School. So Steve, I don't know if you want to talk about Mamas Unidas.
Yeah, just really briefly. So as I was saying before, Mamas Unidas is a nonprofit here in Little Rock. We serve the Hispanic community on college access issues. We have 4 different services. One, we give presentations to the community. A lot of the families will show up, right? And with the Hispanic community, if one student shows up, the mom, the dad, the uncles, the aunts, the cousins, everybody shows up, and we have serve lots of food. So it's fantastic. A great community, very tight knit. And we offer things like teaching them how to pay for college, college fair presentations. We're doing a community service event on May 3rd, looking for volunteers for that. Last year we did that. We had 17 different locations around Central Arkansas with 200 volunteers, and local leaders came out for that one day of service event. If you have students that want to volunteer for that, or you yourselves want to volunteer for that, you can look up more information about that at mamasunidadslr.org. I'll put that in the chat here in a second. We also offer one-on-one counseling services for students. All this is free, of course. So anything regarding college access in general. We also do workshops with students. Okay, so here recently we did a 4-week ACT prep course. Last fall we did another ACT prep course. We've done essay writing workshops, college application workshops, career panels, as well as some ESL program workshops. And then, of course, the MECO program. That's what I'm the director of. It's similar to what Darren Morgan does a little bit, but we have we're about to get our 3rd cohort of students, high achieving students from the Hispanic community, to provide them a robust college admissions curriculum starting from 10th grade. The application for that will be actually published this week. So if you have any students that might be interested in that, you can look that up on our website. And this is a fantastic program. Right now we have 2 seniors, and one of our seniors just got accepted to George Washington, and then the other one just got accepted to Amherst with a full ride. So we're really proud of our 2 seniors right now. But with that, Eric and his team of folks came to help us, and I'm gonna give it to you, Eric, to take it from there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, yes, as I was previously saying, I am a Clinton School master's student. And what the Clinton School is, for those of you who aren't familiar, it was an initiative started by former President Bill Clinton after the end of his presidency. All presidents are given a certain amount of grant and endowment that they can do with their with any initiative of their choice, really, at the end of their presidency. And so Bill Clinton wanted to create a program that was able to facilitate and really just grow the next generation of public servants. And so the structure that we learn at the Clinton School basically prepares us for careers and just a life of public service. And so before this, I was a manager of collaboration and partnership at a nonprofit, an educational nonprofit in Tulsa. And before that, I actually was at the University of Arizona, where I graduated from. I grew up in the Northern Central Valley of California. And then I moved to Arizona and I finished school there. So that's a little bit about me. My degrees in political science, law, and public policy. And here at the Clinton School, we are all getting our master's degree in public policy. And the structure of this program here is basically what they want us to do is integrate us into public service one way or another. And so throughout the entire 2 years that we're here, we are doing some form of field work. So in the first year, we have what we call practicum, which is where all of the students down here, this is my cohort actually, where we're all divvied up into groups and we're placed with people that we had never really known before. And we get to work with a nonprofit or an organization that aligns best with our individual core values. And so myself and 4 other peers were chosen to work with Mamas Unidas, which we also got to choose to work with them. So that was really beautiful. And it's been great really working with them. The summer semester, we do what we call IPSP, or the International service project. And so the school gives us a stipend. They allow us to travel anywhere in the world and work with organizations. We have some people going to work with UNESCO, some people going to work, it just different places all over the world. But it just really depends on where you want to go and what your interests are. I'll be going to Mexico City, where I'll be working with formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated women and providing them with tools and resources for reintegration into society. My passion is education. And so I saw this as an opportunity not only to dive into education in the format of providing people with resources and tools for reintegration, but also as an opportunity to kind of understand the legal system of other countries and how democracy works within different countries, because Mexico has obviously huge cultural identities rather than like in the United States, how we tend to prioritize law and jurisdiction. So the way that the legal proceedings treat people is a lot different there. And then the second year is capstone. So for our second year, we have the privilege of deciding where we want to work, who we want to work with. We're encouraged to stay with an organization in Arkansas if we can. But for a lot of us, sometimes that's not realistic. Some of us had stepped away from an organization or from a position. And so some of us might return to those, some of us might return to our home state. It just depends. So right now we're all kind of anticipating capstone, but we haven't really dove into that yet. So yeah, so that's just a little bit about the Clinton School and what we're doing here in Arkansas. But the goal is, of course, initially to make Arkansas the best that it can be and then to grow outward. And so I think it's going great so far. So in collaboration with Mamas Unidas, the Clinton School, my cohort, my that I'm a part of, the 5 of us, we have built out a mission statement with Mamas Unidas. So this is it. And I'm going to read it to you guys. So in partnership with Mamas Unidas of Little Rock, our practicum project will focus on empowering Hispanic families in Central Arkansas by identifying barriers that undocumented/immigrant students encounter in pursuing higher education. Through research and collaboration, we will aim to discover the best practices nationwide for advising and supporting this student demographic. We will also compile a comprehensive resource guide of local and national resources to provide Mamas Unidas Little Rock and the community to navigate this journey toward higher education, creating a future where all students can pursue their educational aspirations without facing cultural, economic, or socioeconomic obstacles. All right. So throughout this entire process, we knew from the start that we wanted to collect data. We worked alongside Steve, Sandra, and Micah, who are also at Mamas Unidas, and it was important that we kind of figure out what their priorities are, what information and what assistance could we do to better facilitate Mamas Unidas or help them out with moving forward. And so we have kind of been tasked with more so a broad research topic. And so we're able to kind of collect information. And it's not something that's just niche, but more so we're gaining a broader baseline of what is the greater need for these first generation and immigrant families and students in Arkansas who are seeking to obtain post-secondary access, post-secondary education. And so yeah, so it's been a huge learning curve for a lot of us. Initially starting in this, we knew that we would have to take our research and we would have to submit it to the Institutional Review Board, so IRB. For those of you who have done undergraduate research or graduate research, you know that IRB approval can be a bit tedious and strenuous. So we had started kind of anticipating what we wanted to work on and what we wanted to do way before we even wrote out the surveys or the focus groups or the interview questions. And the first assignment that we did, the first thing that we did leading into this was a literature review. And so this literature review was our baseline for what information we had and what information we would be able to collect and what was going to be kind of an obstacle for us. The only issue is that Arkansas is relatively new on the map, so to speak, specifically for a lot of immigrants and first generation families. And so there isn't a lot of information, not a significant amount of academic research or information on barriers that specifically Hispanic individuals have faced in Arkansas. And so having to find scholarly articles or academic research, things like that, that is within the last 5 to 10 years was a bit difficult. There was a couple, there was a couple things, but ultimately we had to start stretching out. And so it was kind of a blessing that I went to the University of Arizona. And so um, when you go to a Hispanic serving institution or a majority Hispanic institution, there's a lot of people who that is their area of research and their area of study. And so some of the literature that we studied came from there. Some of the literature that we studied came from all over the United States, but we tried to focus on places where it would have been most relevant. And so reading case studies and kind of venturing into not just problems that students face accessing post-secondary education, but also problems that they face within identity and um, just existence within the United States as a whole, because you can't be a student if you can't be a person. And so that has been really, really, really challenging, but also very rewarding, especially throughout the process of um, getting our IRB situated. So leading into that, after our literature review was reviewed and we've gone over that, we've kind of used that to move forward. We used that to kind of speak with Steve and the team and see what they needed most. And so we decided that instead of just conducting interviews or service surveys or focus groups, we did all three. And we're in the process of finishing and completing all three. And so for the interviews are important. We just want to kind of sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with individuals and kind of further understand their personal experiences and viewpoints. This is going to help us get some of that really in-depth data and information that you can't really get from a survey. Now, these surveys are the bulk of the information that we're going to be receiving. And these surveys that we've sent out surveys to parents of students, to college students, as well as high school students. And so the surveys, of course, are going to be probably the most rewarding out of all of these as far as data collection goes. However, they were definitely one of our biggest thorns, if you will, because of all of the IRB submissions, having to resubmit everything and making sure that everything was going in accordance to plan, and that everything was moving smoothly. When you submit something to IRB, you have to make sure that the questions you're asking are ethical, that you're keeping in mind, of course, the population that you're assisting and their best interest. And so we wanted to make sure that everything was correct and that everything looked right. And so that is something that is still currently out in the ether. And so the surveys are still collecting data and people are still taking these surveys right now as we speak, which is very exciting. And we hope to have everything finalized by mid-March, but nothing set in stone yet. So fingers crossed on that. And then focus groups. So the final form of research method is these focus groups. And so with these focus groups, what we did was we basically got in a room with parents and we had conversations, and we had the same conversations in a different context with students as well, and kind of just wanting to hear what are unanimous discussions around certain topics, what are shared experiences, and what are individualistic experiences and other people's reactions to those experiences. Sometimes these things can be incredibly sensitive, especially given the current political climate. And so for myself, having the privilege of getting to sit in a room with a group of parents or a group of students who I have a shared experience with, a shared lived experience with, and getting to hear that and really knowing that the work that we're doing is going to help amplify Mamas Unidas in the future and really elevate their programs is something that I feel like is really amazing. So that's the research. That is those are the methods that we've been using and what we plan on finishing out hopefully by mid-March, but we shall see. Fingers crossed, everything takes its time and everything. This has been a learning curve for all of us.
You guys have been doing a great job, Eric. And
Thank you.
just want to throw out there that, I sat in on those focus groups as well. And with the current political climate, like Eric was saying, it did get emotional in there. But I think there was a lot of value that was gained from that. And this is the kind of work that the Clinton school students do with a lot of other organizations too. So big plug for you folks.
Yeah,
Thanks, Eric.
of course. Thank you. Yeah, and like I said, I think for myself personally, it's been just an honor getting to sit with these families and getting to sit with these students and kind of just reflecting on my life. I grew up, as I said earlier, I grew up in the Central Valley of California. So if you're familiar with the Northern Central Valley of California, it's not Hollywood, California. It's not necessarily the Bay Area. My family were agricultural workers. And so my childhood and my life was really just kind of, if I could explain it in a movie, it was McFarland. I had the privilege of not having to work in the fields. My family worked really hard so that, that was an option for me. If I didn't want to, I didn't have to. And I was stubborn. And so I still did it a couple summers in a row to make money. But um, it the point is that um, when you pursue education and you find yourself in a position, it's it's so rewarding to be able to get back into a position to help others. And so being that this is a community that is very close to me, it's been great. Um, Now, these are our current findings that we've had so far. So these are kind of the main characteristics of the data and of the research that we found so far. So I did put a little stipulation that due to IRB regulations, giving any specific information to the data would basically render this project inconclusive. So any numbers or anything that you guys see from here on out is estimates, but they're pretty close estimates, but they're not 100%. And the reason I did that is just kind of to maintain the integrity of the research and keeping in mind everything. And so the four main characteristics of everything that we've seen are cultural barriers, economic challenges, policy, and representation. So when you discuss cultural barriers, it's not just with the parents or the students, but it's also being here. When you come to a new country, there's obviously new customs, there's new shared experiences. And of course, the language barrier is probably one of the biggest things. And so there sometimes tends to be a rift in that. In Arkansas, there's not generally as much accessibility to resources as one might receive in California or in Arizona, where the majority of the population there either has some familiarity with Spanish or at least some comprehension. And so that has been a really big challenge and a really big issue for a lot of these families, especially students who this is their primary language that they speak at home. Their parents don't necessarily have capacity to really understand what's going on, other than the fact that they know that their children's job is to go to school, and that that was one of the main goals, was that their children get a good education. Economic challenges for majority of the students. There's this universal understanding that the cost of education beyond high school and the public sector, public education, is costly. And so one of the biggest deterrents to even approaching post-secondary education is the fact that it's so expensive. And so there's a huge stigma around university and college. And so for that reason, a lot of people tend to be standoffish and they don't tend to engage as much as they would. And so one of our questions and one of our missions is, how can we change the stigma and how can we change this notion around getting people to at least engage with the college admissions process? Because it really is true, once you're in the system, there are ways around tuition. There's ways around having to pay obviously a full tuition or room and board, or there's scholarships that are available, there's grants that are available. Um, but like we said, so having just that representation, which goes down to the one right below it, which is basically just that, in addition to language barriers, there aren't a lot of resources for these students here in Arkansas, other than, of course, Mamas Unidas and the work that Steve does. Outside of that, there's nothing within schools that really encourages students to, or first generation Latino students to seek post-secondary opportunities. And so this can be really challenging, not to say that schools deliberately target or don't target students to access these these goals, but this can be problemsome when students they have no knowledge of this. I write about this a lot, and that was my experience when I moved to Arizona. When I moved to Arizona, I went to live with my father's mom, and she's German. And so going from the Central Valley, California, to living with my blonde hair, blue-eyed German grandmother, I didn't grow up in a culture of having the expectation to go to university or to college, because for me, the goal was to graduate high school. And so when I moved to suburbia, Tucson, Arizona, that is the expectation out of a lot of American families and students, is that their kids, once they graduate high school, move on to college, and either college or trade. And that's just the way that, life worked. And I had no idea. I really didn't. And so that's something that can be a challenge, just as far as cultural barriers representation. And then, of course, statistically, knowing that students who see themselves represented within schools through administration, faculty, and then just acknowledgement of their existence, their culture, things like that can obviously lead to higher academic outcomes. And then the final one, which is, I spoke a little bit on this earlier, but current policy and politics right now. So this has obviously been a very tough time for the Hispanic and immigrant community. To be in a conservative red state alone must have been challenging, but especially in today's political climate, it has only amplified a lot of what's going on right now. And so that has been something that has kind of deterred people. There's a lot of paperwork, and everybody's familiar with the FAFSA application. So just anything that engages with your physical address, using your name, parents' information, things like that can kind of deter students from really accessing the resources that they might be entitled to despite their parents' legal status, and things like that. And so it's been really difficult for a lot of families. It's not just, one or two. It's something that a lot of people are kind of facing right now. And so we're also kind of trying to work around what can be done and what resources are there, other than, of course, like Mamas Unidas, but what resources are there that really encourage students to not be worrisome or to not have trust within the system that is built for them, or that should be built for them. And so, yeah. Moving on to the next slide. So this is kind of the part where we get to all discuss, or you guys get to discuss. I don't know how much time I ran through, but I did put up a little bit of just some of the research that we've gone through. Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I'm trying to move this. So in regard to academic counselors, of the data that we've collected so far, an estimate is that about 31% of students have reported that they were supported by a counselor through the college application process. And so that is, as low as a number as that might sound, it's actually a win. So when you compare that to other schools or other counties or other academic and school districts, and I'm trying to think of the word, but when you can compare it to other like districts nationwide, this can be something that's not quite as large of a number. It's typically like in the teens or the 20 percentile. And the second is only 15% of students reported that they had absolutely no access to post-secondary resources in high school. That's also a win. So that is just suggestive of the fact that there are these resources, or at least there's some inkling of resources. However, they might not be as plentiful. And then leading into the second is 57% of students reported that their high school was supportive of them to attend college or university. And so based off of some of the questions that we have in the surveys, and I believe also some of the focus groups, this is kind of suggestive of the fact that schools here in Arkansas are not necessarily denying students opportunities intentionally. They're not going out of their way, which is, if we were to build up personal hypotheses, I'm not from the South, I'm not from Arkansas. And so based off of national trends and policy, I would honestly have thought otherwise. And so this is something that's really refreshing to see, because that's quite a large number. But obviously there's not as many resources, and um, there's not a significant amount of people who are able to really not only communicate with students, but also with parents, and able to fully extrapolate all the information that they need to, um, regarding their child's academic performance and post-secondary opportunities and things like that. So those are just a couple numbers. I couldn't share too much. I spoke with a group about this. And so that's, unfortunately, that was a group decision. But some discussion points. As professionals, what have your personal experiences been with the Hispanic community and Hispanic and immigrant students? And can you think of any alleviating solutions to better aid this demographic of students? And before we get into that discussion, I think it's also important to acknowledge that a lot of the work that college and career high school student counselors are tasked with is obviously so much more than what they can do as one person. I know the ratio for a counselor to a student is astronomically, it's huge. And so when I was working in Tulsa, some of the student ratios between counselors was in the hundreds. And so this can be obviously troubling, and the lack of school funding and things like that can also be incredibly difficult. And so it's one of those things where we as students have to acknowledge, and this is all students, whether it's university students, high school students, that there is only so many resources that are available to students, and college and career counselors, academic counselors, advisors, of course, are supposed to be our lifeline. But so many of us know that there's only so much that can be done, right? And so what can we do to encourage and to push institutions to advocate for more funding or more capacity, higher accessibility to solutions? If anybody has anything that they would like to share or discuss, please feel free.
Yeah.
Steve, would you mind if we gave access to our guests to talk?
Yeah.
That way we can turn this into a discussion.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. All of you now have ability to talk. So feel free to unmute yourself and give us your perspective on this. Any thoughts? As professionals, what have your personal experiences been with the Hispanic community and students? And can you think of any alleviating solutions to better aid this demographic? The
And if
floor is
anybody has
open.
any questions about our work or anything that we've done so far with Mamas Unidas, or any suggestions to anything that we might be able to consider in our research, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. I guess I can kick it off. So one thing, so again, my name is Darren Morgan. I am the executive director of Arkansas Commitment. We're a program very, very similar to Mamas Anita's, where we assist high achieving Black students into getting to highly selective colleges. We've been around for about 20 years, and as of now, we work with close to 200 students per year. In the past, I still go into various high schools, and when I do that, I work with any student that they're willing to put me in front of, Black, white, Asian, Latino. It truly doesn't matter. We want to assist. And one thing I have noticed when working with the Hispanic and Latinx community is I think Eric, you said it earlier, the need for the cultural aspect where students want to stay close to home and stay close to family. And a lot of times with education, we talk about, first generation students, low income students, and unfortunately, the way we still do admissions and advising is kind of like a blanket, one stop, one size fits all type deal. And that doesn't take into consideration the cultural aspect of what students need. And one thing about the immigrant community when they're coming in is that while we do practice various forms of admissions and cultural needs, they practice a very unique form called migration chain theory, where if one family member was the first person to come to America, they're learning as they go as far as how the academic system works, how higher ed works. And if they do go to college, they're spreading their experience through word of mouth. So it's kind of a trickle down effect through family members, through trusted loved ones, through community members, and it does take a while to go. So one thing I have noticed is that when you are advising, especially immigrant students, it has to be a family thing. It can't just be the student themselves because they may not feel like they will get that support if their parents don't understand the process or know how the financial aid works, or just have any fears about sending their child out of state. So that is just one aspect that I have seen over the time.
Thanks, Darren. Eric, if you don't mind, I'll just really quickly throw my sense in there since I work with a lot of Hispanic students. Darren's right. I mean, it is a family thing, right? And when I meet with students, the parents are there, the siblings are there. Um, and you have to understand, like from the Hispanic community, my family's from Peru, for example. You go back home to a lot of like the Latin American, countries, families live together, right? Grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, they all kind of live in the same household or close by at least, right? So it is important to engage the parents, right? There's also the dynamic with female students and the connection to the family. And there's a bit kind of like an old school culture that still resides with the Hispanic community to be able to allow the independence of the female student to be able to go. So there are a lot of cultural aspects to this. Like Eric was saying, there's also a lot of fear with today's politics. For example, we do a monthly workshop with the Mijo students, and we had to do a virtual workshop this past month because students were afraid to travel to our usual location every month, right? So just being aware of the fact that the reason why students might not seem engaged in the Hispanic community, it might not be because they don't want to be, because they don't like education or something. It's probably because they're fearful for their family, giving information, things like that. So,
Yeah, and that is one other thing. I'm sorry, Steve.
oh, go ahead.
That is one other thing I've seen too. I think with immigrants, especially, and this goes for all Caribbeans I've worked with, Africans, is pretty much the same. Is that when they look at the price tags and they tell their parents that this school costs $80,000 without understanding need-based aid or institutional funding that's not tied to federal funding, I think it's very important to catch the kid early, eighth,
Mhm.
ninth grade, 10th grade, because if you catch them way too late, one, it's too late to tell them what they need to do to get into these highly selective schools that will fund everything. But two, their mind already becomes made up on they have to help the family in some kind of aspect, whether it's work, the family company, or stay close to home to help out with loved ones. But if you can show the benefit of it and the cost effectiveness of it, of attending college and how it can pay off dividends in the long run, it does tremendously help out. I had one student that I was working with a few years ago that was a Jamaican immigrant, and she had no idea about the American education system because the Caribbeans follow more of a British style higher ed system. So working with her family based in Virginia to get her into school in the South was really interesting because you do have to really engage the whole family. And once they can see that it's okay, one, it will be safe to send their kids to the South, into a red state, especially. They're on board. If the funding is there, they're definitely on board. Steve, you said something interesting too about the female student or the female child in the household. I think cross culturally with the Black community as well, we see the same thing. And it's more of an investment, considered an investment anyway, to send the female student to college and not necessarily the men. So you will see the young men will stay home or enter the military, but the family is more willing to invest in a daughter's higher ed experience to invest in her future. It's seen as more of a long-term investment.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren. Anyone else want to give their take on this at all? The floor's open if you want to. Okay. Well, Eric, thank you. Do you have anything more you would like to add before you?
I don't believe so. If anybody has any questions for me, I'd be more than willing to try and answer them. Like I said, this has been a great privilege. I'm very happy that I've been able to do this work and that I've been able to have this opportunity to present with you all. I'm very grateful. Um, it wasn't something that I had ever really thought that I would do or be a part of. It's hard sometimes to consider. This was a challenge for me when I first started. This was that we had to get on board, and this is something that happened internally with our practicum group, me and the other four, was that a lot of the questions and ideas that they were having in the beginning had to get shut down, because I think that sometimes people hear research or they hear like academic performance and that takes over, and they forget that these are people and these are people's shared lived experiences. And so it just so happened that this was my shared lived experience. Um, I never really thought that I would have an opportunity to kind of study my cultural upbringing and study my educational outlook on life um, through a master's degree. So this has been really interesting. So yeah, so that's where I come from for that. And like I said, it's been great.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Eric, for the presentation, and thanks to the Clinton School for their support with Amas Unidas. Just keep in mind that the Clinton School does partner with a lot, like Eric was saying, with a lot of local organizations, whether it's educational organizations or others, to provide this type of research and kind of like consulting work a little bit in a way, with both their practicum and the capstone project. My brother graduated from the Clinton School, so I saw him work with local entities. So definitely a resource that I think a lot of folks in Little Rock don't really know about. So I encourage you to explore that. They're doing great things at that school. So,
Yeah.
um,
And
so
if anybody has any questions about the Clinton School or what we do, if you guys are looking for somebody to tackle on a capstone project, maybe, or if you guys might need a practicum group next year to work with your nonprofit, please reach out.
awesome. Well, thank you, Eric.
Thank you so
So
much.
so next we will go with Darren. Darren, you're the last one to wrap it up for us. And gonna, or if you want to unshare your screen, Eric. There you go. All right, it's all yours, Darren.
All right. And I've already introduced myself about 2 times already. So I'm sorry. It's like I'm gonna have to log out and hop back in. I'm so sorry. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back. Actually, I don't. Never mind. All right. Can you see my screen at this point?
Yep, I see your screen.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. So a little bit of background about who I am, and what I wanted to do with this presentation. So my name is Darren Morgan. Again, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. Went to a large public school, urban public school, and really just got lucky in the college admissions process. I knew absolutely nothing about it. Like Eric was saying, public schools, especially, the counselor caseload is extremely high. The average is about 450 students per counselor, which is impossible when you really think about having one person or a small team of people to assist a school of 2,000 students navigate that college admissions process. Because of that, I really didn't know what I was doing. Luckily, I had a great group of friends, and we all kind of shared resources and what we learned together. And my high school was great, even though it was large, but my mom worked there, and the registrar and everyone looked out, and they kind of voluntold me what classes I was going to take. Because of that, I was able to take the right classes, really by accident. Was able to get a good SAT score and get into a great school. But while attending that school, I realized that I just got lucky, you know. So I had a work study in the admissions office where I learned a lot about how that process worked. After I graduated, left, went into the banks, and came back to my alma mater to work in admissions. And that's really where I got my start. Um, right now, I serve as the executive director of Arkansas Commitment, which is a community-based organization that helps high achieving students get into highly selective colleges. But I'm all about equity and access for all students. So I'm on the board of SACAC, but as one of the state admissions co-chairs, as well as a few other boards that help students just navigate higher ed. When I thought about what was going on right now, just politically and in higher ed and in the state of Arkansas, I wanted to do a presentation that would really give information, but allow us to talk at the same time. So we're going to go through trends shaping student enrollment in Arkansas right now. Some of it will be slightly political because of some of the policies that have had, occurred in recent weeks or months that have impacted students' access to higher ed or their ability to afford it. At any point, feel free to hop in. I do want to turn this more into a conversation than me talking at you all. And I do understand that I'm the last person, so I'm the last thing between you and probably going to lunch right now. So I'm gonna to try to go through it as fast as I can and still be as thorough as possible. So when we start out, let's do a quick overview of Arkansas and where we're currently standing. So according to the Department of Higher Ed, we're actually on a decline. And I estimate that this decline will continue to happen. One, with the drop of college age students that are entering high school and college at this point. And from my research, I believe we're going to be seeing that decline for the next 5 or 10 years or so. So I can actually predict that it's going to become more competitive for our students to get into college as colleges start really narrowing down on who they want, the type of student that they're looking for, and the access that they're going to be able to have. Competition for colleges as far as recruitment is going to be a little bit steeper as they go. But in the state of Arkansas right now, we're looking at 52% of our high school graduates are enrolling in college. And that is a dip of about 10% in the past 10 years since the last report was done through the Department of Ed on this stat. Rural students are going to be more impacted by that number. Just to go back just a little bit, so rural students are going to be way more impacted by that number, only because it's a little bit harder for them to take the classes that they need to overcome those financial barriers and to get the information that they will make a difference in their college admissions process. I firmly believe that there is a cycle that occurs of an information gap. When you think about the rural communities, one, you don't typically have admissions counselors from those highly selective schools go into those areas because they just can't have enough time in their week and their travel schedules to get there. So when we think about students that attend schools in maybe the rural parts of Arkansas, 2 hours away from the airport, in the middle of, small towns, those students are going to be extremely impacted because of their lack of ability to take advanced placement courses, maybe to get ACT prep at certain centers like in Little Rock or in major cities, Fayetteville or wherever. So because of that, the level of preparation is going to be reduced and diminished compared to other students. When you think about the lower income students as well, it's the exact same thing, the socioeconomic aspect of it. Um, it affects students' ability to, one, pay, and two, to understand the importance of things like extracurricular activities and how they impact the college admissions process, but also just the types of students that type of colleges that students aspire to go to. When you look at these price tags of colleges that are like $90,000 a year, and for a student or a family that doesn't understand need-based financial aid or the amount of grants and scholarships that exist that will fully fund their experience, um, they opt typically to attend two-year colleges or colleges that aren't as selective just for the affordability aspect. And while that is great that they're still pursuing college, that does create at times the issue that we call undermatching. where you have really, really bright students that could get into the Harvards and the Stanfords that opt to go to colleges that are a little bit less rigorous. One, to save their parents money. Two, because they think that that is the only option that they have because they aren't aware that they can get into these other schools. And undermatching is a huge problem. I think on estimate about 45% of students across America undermatch. And the reason why that is a problem is students that undermatch tend to typically drop out at a much higher rate. Out of boredom, out of not feeling that they're getting enough bang for their buck, the value just isn't there, or they're attending colleges that don't have the resources that they need to really feel like they're feeling fulfilled academically. Throughout it all, though, Black and Latino students are still typically the most underrepresented at four-year institutions, especially at the highly selective schools. Um, when we look at in Arkansas the impact of dual enrollment and concurrent credit courses, we have seen an 8% increase in that, almost a 9% increase in that over the years, which is amazing. However, one thing that the state has been seeing is a reduction in retention rates is one major concern that they're seeing across the board. From what I've seen through research, I believe that the main reason of that is while we are providing students with a lot of vocational prep courses and opportunities to take dual enrollment, concurrent credits, we're not allowing them to connect those dots and see how it could be affordable. Also, in our university system, if they want to leave the state or if they want to take some of their credits, transfer them from their high school level to the college level, it's we haven't really been as clear and as transparent as needed throughout that process. So what typically happens is students go through the dual enrollment or the concurrent credit courses. They load up on those thinking that they're going to be a college sophomore or junior by the time they enroll to save their parents money. But what happens is sometimes those classes are going to be accepted on a case by case basis. And students won't receive credit for every course they take. And they end up losing those. And then they have to figure out if it's really worth it to start that process over again. And because of that, I guess, fork in the road that they're put in and that decision you have to make, typically students decide not to continue on. So while they do have those college courses on their transcript, those credits under their belt, the retention rate is low because they're not continuing on after that. So I would like to see some kind of ideas or some kind of maybe brainstorming on what things that we can do to maybe inform students on those options or just make them more aware of it so they can continue to pursue those degrees that they've already started. Looking at Black student enrollment over the years, we're at a 9% decrease since 2020. Hispanic students have increased by almost 4%. Now, again, the retention rates are a little bit low there. And there's a couple things that we can do, like we just stated, that could help out. But as of now, we do see an increase in Latino students, at least attending college. We can do some things to help that retention rate, though. As far as rural students, they're also 35% less likely to attend that four-year college. And that's based off of things that we talked about earlier. And one other aspect that we don't talk about enough, actually, and it came up during COVID, is the technology gap. Um, and coming from Atlanta and just being in major cities all my life, you never really think about it. But in certain parts of the state and certain parts of the country, there's still areas that don't have broadband internet. And as a lot of colleges now are moving towards virtual recruitment or putting all the information in the workshops online or on YouTube, students without broadband aren't able to access that information. So there is a complete knowledge gap that exists there. Um, with Arkansas Commitment, we are working with a few other organizations like UAMS to go out into some rural parts of the state, like in the Delta and other areas, to try to make students more aware of the process and things that, give them resources that they wouldn't be able to get otherwise. One of those would be virtual ACT prep, as well as advising through Arkansas Commitment free of charge, just to help students out that would love to go to school, but maybe just need a little bit more guidance on how to get there or help trying to figure it out. Barriers to college enrollment. The first that we're going to talk about be financial barriers. Tuition costs have risen dramatically over the years. If we go back to the past 50 years or so, when we look at Pell Grants, the amount of money that Pell Grants used to give has been drastically reduced over the years. Earlier on in its existence, it covered about 75% of college tuition. And right now, according to the most recent study, it only covers less than 20% for students. So that produces a huge financial strain for students that want to attend the state schools that's going to rely on that federal Pell Grant money to attend, and it puts a huge financial obstacle. Also, students aren't fully aware of those two forms, the FAFSA and the CSS profile. We hear a lot about the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, but we don't really hear too much about the CSS profile, the college scholarship search profile. And that is like a institutional version of the FAFSA, where the FAFSA only looks at income for your families. The CSS profile looks at income, but also major expenses. So the amount of debt that you have, mortgage that you have remaining, credit card debt, or anything like that, business is not doing well, medical expenses, all of that is factored into the CSS profile. So what happens is it produces a number that is actually more affordable for families. But because we don't talk about the CSS profile, or not enough institutions use it, a lot of students don't know to apply to schools that will cover 100% need-based financial aid, or all their expenses to go to and attend that school for 4 years to make it affordable for their families. When we look at the FAFSA, I believe, I think I have a slide for this, I'm not sure, but 40%, our completion rate has been low in the state of Arkansas. Only about 40% of our students actually complete the FAFSA. And the number one reason why students have reported that they don't fill it out is because they didn't think that they will be eligible for it. And 9 times out of 10, unless their parents, hit the lottery or something like that, they will qualify for some form of aid, whether it's Pell Grant or institutional funding. But it is extremely important for students to fill out the FAFSA if they're applying to a school that requires a CSS profile, to fill that out, because that opens them up for any funding that the school or the state or the government will be able to give them. K-12 educational inequalities. So low-income schools often lack advanced placement courses, or IB courses, along with qualified counselors. Those systemic inequalities really result in few opportunities for students to prepare for success. So I talked about it a little bit when we discussed the rural communities, right? So you have huge counselor caseloads, 400, 500 students per counselor. In certain areas, you may only have one counselor for the entire school. And on average, students only meet with their high school counselors for about 15 minutes per year. So 45 minutes to an hour over their whole college career. And there's been reports that show that it's usually the top 10% of the student body that gets access to the counselors, or the lower 10%, the students that they want to help navigate the high school completion process. So what happens in the middle is the students that are okay, trying to figure it out, they're doing well and they're maintaining, they're losing a lot of information that is really critical for them to succeed in this process. There's a lot of other educational qualities that happen too. And since this is legislative day, I'm going to tap into it politically. But this doesn't represent Arkansas commitment, SAC Act. This is truly just my opinion. But when we look at how schools get funding through tax dollars, through property taxes, they're navigating, and that money is distributed around that community. So if we look at higher income areas in Little Rock, those public schools are going to receive more money because the houses and the property around those schools are elevated. And that's going to allow that school to get more funding for um, technology, to fund teachers if it's at a charter school or a private school, to get better materials and better resources to put their students at a great opportunity. Now, students that are in lower income neighborhoods, that is in low income schools, since the property values are a little bit lower, the amount of tax dollars that will go to that school will also be lower. So students that are already at a disadvantage through socioeconomic reasons are already now at a further disadvantage because their schools are receiving lower funding to help them navigate that process. And we see that a lot. It's not Arkansas, it's actually just an American thing. But it's one thing to be mindful of as we're navigating and helping students navigate this college admissions process and really just completing their high school journey, is that we have to be mindful of the lack of resources that some schools have. And with that lack of resources, we look at the lack of AP courses in schools, especially public schools that don't have as many AP classes to offer their students. Because they don't have as many, the students won't get as much preparation um, that will be critical for them to finish that college, their 4 years. When I was an admissions counselor, we were trained to look at certain classes that students took and certain things like AP calculus. For math, especially when we look at the course sequence of students that take in every class above Algebra 2 increases their chance of graduating from our eyes by 20%. So for schools that don't offer the AP calculus or may not have enough students signed up for it or any other AP courses, it's perceived that the level of preparation is a little bit lower and their chances of graduating will also be from a four-year college be a little bit lower. And that makes admissions counselors a little bit nervous of admitting students. And it's nothing to do with the student's fault and everything to do with the lack of resources and opportunities that they have at their school, which is caused by systemic inequalities that creates a disadvantage from school to school. Challenges for first generation students, we talk about the hidden curriculum processes like financial aid and class registration, and that lack of guidance leads to lower enrollment, retention rates across that demographic. And it is, again, truly just about the amount of knowledge and amount of opportunities that they have to learn. When we talk about the hidden curriculum, there's really three things or three theories that navigate that process. And it's really based off of socioeconomic status, race, and culture. To be 100%. There's this one professor at UPenn, Annette LaRoe, wrote a beautiful book, Unequal Childhoods, where she studied and followed students from kindergarten through 12th grade. I believe she followed 16 students and across various socioeconomic levels and parent education levels to see the different opportunities they would get along the way, as well as the expectations that they would attend college or four-year college after they graduated. And what she found out was that students with parents with higher degrees or higher income, they're expected to go to college, but they're also expected to hop in more extracurricular opportunities and more enrichment programs. And while that sounds, like a given or like a resource thing, it is a huge reason why students that are in those programs are more likely to attend college because of that level of expectation and preparation. The hidden curriculum that she discusses breaks down to three different theories, and one will be natural growth, and two will be concerted cultivation. Now, another theory that comes up later on will be migration chain theory, which is what I talked about a little bit earlier. And that is a cultural thing for first generation immigrants coming in, where they're learning through that chain of information, where one person comes to the country first and then they tell their family members about what they've learned. But what they've learned is very limited because of the amount of time they've been here and the amount of time that they've dedicated to pursuing higher ed or learning about higher ed. For lower income students, and typically this is in the Black community and in the Brown community, but we learn through a model of natural growth where we are learning from our cousins, our family members, people in our neighborhood, and we see more of legacy college trends when it comes to that natural growth. When you think about it from a career standpoint or from a college standpoint, when you think about your first job, if you're following natural growth theory, is that, if you needed a first job and your cousin worked at the factory and you asked them to help you get a job, they're going to help you get a job at their factory. If you aren't really sure about the college admissions process and your favorite cousin attended a school, even if your GPA is way higher, your ACT score is way higher, you're typically going to follow their trend because that's more familiar to you and that's what you know. Also, the amount of exposure that you get based off of schools. In Arkansas, it's always been a joke, but you can see it that our students really typically don't leave Arkansas. Steve talked about his students going to Amherst and I think George Washington, and that is incredible. Um, and typically, what we see with students from Arkansas is that they will stay either in Arkansas or in states that touch Arkansas. They really rarely venture out to California, New York, or to the extreme coast of America. So what happens is the amount of exposure that they get to out of state schools will be limited because those colleges won't recruit here because of that, or they'll spend not as much time here as they will in other states. The other aspect of it is that studies have shown that when there's a college within a 50-mile radius of a high school, students are typically more exposed to the college admissions process and receive more preparation because of just that exposure to this college. So when we think about students in the rural communities or in areas where colleges aren't anywhere close to it, their chances of going to college or four-year college is a lot lower because they're just not aware of one, the fact that they can and the steps needed to take to get there. The other model that she discusses is the concerted cultivation, and that's typically seen in higher income families or families with terminal degrees, where parents have both, both parents have terminal degrees. And that is because those families understand that they already navigated through the college process, they know what it took to get there, and they know what college admissions counselors are looking for. So because of that, they're putting their students in different programs like UAMS's Summer Research Initiative, or they'll find internships to shadow doctors or to just get involved and to further cultivate their students' passions. With that concerted cultivation, what they'll do is if your student wants to be a lawyer, it's a lot easier for wealthy families to say, hey, I know a lawyer, I have a lawyer, I'll ask my lawyer if my student or my child can follow them for a summer. That's shadowing opportunity, or the same thing with doctors, with pre-med. And that level of exposure early on is typically something that's not seen often in minority communities or in underrepresented communities. And it creates a huge um, disparity between opportunities and preparation. But since colleges love to see that an adult has already taken the time to develop and grow and give the student a foundation in pre-med or pre-law or any other area that they're really interested in, they're typically going to accept them at a much higher rate. So extracurriculars are important, but when we typically talk about what colleges look for, we telling our students a good GPA and a good ACT score, but the hidden curriculum is truly a make or break thing that students aren't always exposed to. I skipped around a little bit. I talked about the financial aid gaps, but one thing that has happened recently that has affected our students will be the FAFSA delays. Now, with the FAFSA Simplification Act, it was supposed to really help the FAFSA process and expedite the process and make it a lot easier for our families. But over the past 2 years, that has not always been the case. Delays in that, and while students, let me backtrack a little bit. The FAFSA Simplification Act, I don't know why I'm tongue-tied now, but that one, that project actually reduced the number of questions on the FAFSA from over 100 to only about 36. So it did make it a lot easier. But some challenges when the FAFSA rollout actually helped or hurt students' chances of going to school. Because of the slower rollout of it, award letters were also sent out much, much later, and students were unaware of their eligibility for aid way later than what was needed for them to make a healthy decision. So because of that, students either didn't enroll, or they deferred enrollment, or decided to just wait until the last minute to apply or enroll. So the number of our FAFSA completers actually dropped over the past couple of years because of factors leading from that or stemming from the FAFSA Simplification Act and the delay in that. So one thing that I would love to see across this region will be public FAFSA nights, events where organizations like Mamas Anita's, Park, SWAG, which is another CBO in Little Rock, and all these others could actually put together our resources, share space, share information, share knowledge, But in other states, in other cities that have done public FAFSA nights or citywide FAFSA events, they've seen increase in FAFSA completion rates. And that is a really quick fix, really low hanging fruit that we can do to really help our students understand that this is something that they can do. They can complete the FAFSA. It is a lot easier. And that, you know, they can receive funding to attend school without putting their parents in a huge burden. Consequences of DEI program cuts. I'm gonna take a sip for this one. So recent policy changes have led to tons of financial cuts in higher ed. We know about the removal of DEI from the federal government, but we've already received that in Arkansas through the Lawrence Act a couple of years ago. And with that, regardless of what side of the aisle that you stand on, it has hurt, especially lower income students and minority and underrepresented students funding. In the past couple of weeks, we have seen other policy changes as far as the removal of the 1964 scholarship, which helped Black students with scholarships as well as entering STEM careers and agriculture careers. Since they no longer receive that federal funding going forward, it's going to be a lot harder for students to navigate this admissions process, to afford their 4 years of college, but also to continue on and persist through colleges if the funding isn't there. So in a state where Black students going and pursuing STEM careers is already low, I believe we're at 9%. You can anticipate that number to continue to drop because of that. Something else that's going to impact the state is the removal of the federal land grant funds. So colleges like UAPB or diversity programs like UAMS's Summer Research Initiative or other state or federal funded programs designed to help minority students are at risk of losing funding and losing that financial support where they can help students really get that leg up and receive that extracurricular exposure that we talked about earlier. One other thing that is going to impact the Hispanic and Latinx community with that removal of federal funds for diversity schools will be the Hispanic serving institutions or HSIs. HBCUs will also take a hit in that same category. This number will be a little bit scarier for the Latinx and Hispanic community because that community attends HSIs at a rate of 25%. I can't remember the full stat, but I believe more Hispanic and Latino students attend HSIs because of the affordability, because of the community aspect that they have and the family feel that they have. But typically, these schools are already show lower funding than some of the highly selective colleges out there, or some of the schools that, the Ivies with the huge endowments. So a further reduction of any grant money or any federal money going their way could be traumatic to both HSIs and HBCUs. So that's something to keep an eye on as time progresses. These policies will also affect student retention rates, especially for students that aren't able to afford those 4 years of college tuition or that will lose some scholarships or federal funding to attend school or diversity scholarships. So for some colleges that had pure diversity scholarships for students of color or underrepresented groups based off of race, they will either have to switch the criteria for that funding, which might reduce and probably will reduce the number of minority students that will be able to be eligible for that money. But it will also, in the long run, hurt the sustainability of those programs for students that are considered at risk or need additional funding or support to stay there complete 4 years. All right, so not to be a Debbie Downer the entire time, there are some things that we can do to help out, and one, like I said, will be the FAFSA nights. Speaking to students in a way that's relatable to them. So I know working through my students that one thing they will not do is read emails. Emails have not been my number one way of communicating with students lately, but text reminders of something that have greatly helped out. Putting parents and students on email threads to keep everyone in a loop, using services like Score, which is a CRM and college research tool that connects the student, the parent, and the counselor, whether it's at a high school or a CBO, um, so that everyone can stay in lockstep as a child research colleges look for funding, and just try to figure out, what schools they want to go to and what would be the best fit. So Arkansas Commitment, we use Score. Steve, Mamas and Anita's, what do you all use over there?
We use Maya Learning.
Learning. So it's a lot of different tools out there. They're all great. Um, I'm not sure of the cost associated with my learning. I know Naviance is one that public schools typically use, and that one does come at a high cost that schools typically will absorb for the student. But these are all great tools. I put the link for Score in the chat. Even if you're not affiliated with a community-based organization or a private school, if you're just a student or a family that wants to sign up and use it, you can do so free of charge. For CBOs, it comes at a discounted rate. I believe it's like $2 per student, which in the long run is pretty affordable for the amount of resources that it provides students and families with. Another one's creating supportive school environments. So especially when it comes to students of color, Black, Asian, Latino students have all shown the exact same thing where these students are typically learning from their friends more than anything else. The trusted people in a circle. For Black students, it's typically their friends, their counselors, their teachers. And for the Latinx and Hispanic communities, it's typically more so peers. So friends that they're navigating that process with, or older friends that they respect and will listen to. But those two things show that creating a supportive environment, like a Arkansas Commitment, like a Mamas Anita's, like a Swag, like a Park, just to name some in Little Rock, are all ones that are programs that will make a collection and a cohort of students with high goals, with high aspirations to attend college, but will continue to support and motivate each other as they go. Something about peer pressure as a high school student, it wins a lot. So to put students in a positive environment, they're able to learn from their friends and from their cohorts and push each other along the way, creates a level of just community where you see this number of stats of students that look for colleges and look for different types of colleges than previous classes. They typically will go for the more selective, the harder schools to get into, and they will typically try to outpace each other just as a competition thing and take more advanced placement courses or do more ACT prep to try to increase their score. So putting students in a positive environment and grouping them together is extremely beneficial for the student and for the school. With Arkansas Commitment, we have teamed up with a couple of different high schools in the area. East STEM is one of our official partners, Southwest, as well as Hall West, one of the newest schools in Little Rock, to try to create those environments by doing school visits and workshops, and creating cohorts within the schools to remove that transportation barrier to make sure that students can get access to this information regardless of if they have access um, to our program on Saturdays or virtually. We'll go to them to make sure they can do it. And that creates that college one culture that we talked about, where mentorship programs and fostering that early exposure to college resources, it reduces that dropout risk and encourages students to pursue higher education. And it also reduces the tend to undermatch that I spoke about earlier, when students tend to attend schools that are not as selective or not as rigorous as they could probably get access to on their own. So I wanted to turn this more into a conversation than just straight up talking points. So you all have access to talk now. So if anyone wants to hop on and just share some ideas about what has worked for you all, Eric actually stole one of my ideas earlier, and it's funny how none of us actually met. Well, I didn't meet with Steve and Eric ahead of time. I don't know if y'all met, but we all kind of built off of each other just organically. And I don't know if it's because of everything that's going on. But one thing I wanted to do, and I'm really huge on sharing resources. I think that there is enough information to go around, and even though some schools or some organizations might see it as competition, I don't believe in competition because we're all working in the same lane to really help these students out. So what I would love to do, and to see if you guys are open to it, is to kind of counter everything that's going on politically right now. If we could create a shared resource, maybe a Google Doc, a Google Sheet, where we could have access to it, and it would be a live document that we can continue to add links, add resources based off of things that we found that will help our students, whether that's scholarship programs, um, resources as far as ACT prep, and other things that can that we've have experienced that will help our students navigate this process successfully and find dollars to go. So at a time when federal funding isn't going to be there, or state level funding might decrease, I think it's going to be important for us to form our own communities where we will be able to just support our students how we see fit, honestly. I'm going to open it up to any questions if anyone wants to throw some in the Q&A, but again, you all can also unmute and talk as well.
Well, first of all, Darren, thank you for all of that. I feel like every time we chat, either formally or informally, I'm always learning something new from you. So I really
Thanks,
appreciate
man.
it. Really love the public FAFSA night. Um, I can just say right now that without even talking to my colleagues at Mamas Unidas, I guarantee we would love to join, forces on that. I think that's a great
All right.
idea.
Yeah. And if we can do it in the fall, we do our symposium in the fall, and we'll try to bring as many colleges that we can in the fall as well. I would love to start sharing those resources more and collaborating more. I know I invite all the organizations in the city to come out, but I think we should definitely start making more partnerships and sharing resources with public schools and with CBOs out here, because um, is looking at the decrease in college enrollment for students of color and underrepresented students is getting scary. And politically, in the long run, the lack of students that will be college educated is going to create a less skilled workforce. And that's going to create a job market out here where we're going to have a really hard time bringing in employers in 10, 20 years or so. I think this is something that can help the state by just creating avenues for our students to get these resources to help out.
Absolutely. And I also love the maybe like a Google, document of some kind, spreadsheet of some kind that we can all share and add to it, because there's just so much information out there that we just not that everyone's territorial or anything, but like, it's just if we just all came together as a coalition, and I mean, I know we've talked about this before,
Yeah,
just being able to access some of the information could be really helpful for all of us. So if you want to initiate that, I can get the list from this session, and we can add them
yeah,
in there. Maybe you might have like a format that you think might work best. Um,
yeah. So I've created one already. I just want to float the idea in the conversation today. And I have the I already cheated to see who's going to be on the call. So I have the emails already.
awesome.
So if y'all are open to it, I can send out the email later on, today or tomorrow, with that Google Doc, and we can start adding to it.
Oh, that'd be great. And for anyone else that's on right now, you have access to unmute if you would like to say anything or add to it. Um, but if
But
not,
again, yeah, I know I'm the last call for the day, and it's coming up
we've
on
got lunch around the
lunchtime. So,
corner, and but
but
Darren, I just want to thank you so much for that presentation. I wrote a lot of notes down from your information, and please let me know how else I can collaborate, and the folks love to get that Google Doc and add some of our stuff in there. And then when Eric from the Clinton School has his resource guide for Hispanic students, we can add that in there too. So yeah, we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, sounds good. And before I let everyone go, Steve, I got to give you a shout out too, just on behalf of SACAC, because putting back on my SACAC board member hat, man. Thank you for all the work you did on that. So on planning this meeting and bringing in speakers, a lot of people don't realize how much work goes into planning these drive-in workshops. These are 3-hour meetings that are timely, but it's up to the chair to figure out what they want to talk about, and that's a lot of pressure. So thank you for putting it together. And Steve actually had the blended role of driving workshop coordinator as well as legislative coordinator or legislative chair. So it's a lot of work on his head, on his hands. So thank you for doing it for us, man.
Oh, I appreciate that. And on that note, if anybody would like to be a co-chair with me for government relations, unfortunately, Wendell is doing his PhD program and doing a lot of amazing things. But would love to join forces with somebody, to plan for the next year. So if
Yeah.
anyone's interested, let me know.
And hold off before we end the call. I'm gonna put a link in the chat. So the spirit hit me recently, so I made all these other Google Docs. But if anyone is interested in volunteering for SACAC, I highly recommend it. It's a great organization just for professional development, networking, resources. And again, for CBOs, community-based organizations like Mamas Anita's, SWAG, they're free of charge. So membership is free of charge. So if you're interested in attending or joining, please do so. Our conference is coming up at the end of March, March 30th and 31st. I think it's April 1st. It's going to be in Atlanta, Georgia at the Marriott Marquis, beautiful hotel right downtown. So definitely sign up. If you can't attend, because it is right around the corner, our Sweet Tea College Tour is coming up, as well as Dry Run. And Dry Run is a great opportunity just to learn. It's a time for people that are new counselors or um, just want to brushing up on some old skills to attend basically an admissions boot camp over the summer to learn or relearn aspects of admissions. So it is a great program, and again, as a member, you will get a discounted rate. But if you do want to sign up to volunteer for SACAG, which I highly recommend, we do have a few opening roles in. I'm sorry, I didn't send it to all. We have a few opening roles in Arkansas. We are in need of one state and area initiative chair. Nicole Griffin is on the call. That is our current one. She would probably love a co-chair as well. Steve with government relations would also love a co-chair. But I would also um, shameless plug, one thing that we used to do that we haven't done in a while will be the college admissions workshop days, which is a mini boot camp in person that we haven't done in Arkansas since COVID. SACAC funds it. It will be a free public event and a great way to really just spread um, the information that we should all share today and other aspects of how to get into admissions across the city for free. If anyone is interested in volunteering for that, I think Lauren is on, I believe she might have volunteered, might be hopping on next year. We would love that. And if so, she would also need a co-chair as well. So you can sign up on that link there.
Awesome. All right. Well, Darren, thank you again. Great information. The Google Docs that Jen just shared is there, so you can access that to volunteer. But finally, just remember, if not me, then who? When it comes to advocacy, they need to hear our stories. It's as simple as sending an email out to those legislators, and then the power of our voices together and sharing resources. Looking forward to Darren's Google Doc that hopefully we can grow across Arkansas to share all these amazing resources, especially in light of what's going on politically at the federal level, and we'll see how it pans out at the state level. So, but with that, if you have any questions for me, please reach out, and thank you for coming, and go enjoy some lunch. See you guys.
I'll take care.